Story 1. I've been on the road most of my adult life, chasing quiet places the way some people chase noise. There's a strange kind of peace in pulling your rig off the highway, settling under pine or sky, and letting the hum of humanity fade into crickets and wind. But there's also a truth I've learned that doesn't show up in brochures or Facebook groups. The deeper you go into stillness, the more you hear things that don't make sense. The more you see things that won't be seen twice. My name's Everett James. I'm 56. Divorced, no kids. I live full-time in a 1987 Bluebird Wander Lodge. I rebuilt myself after retiring from 30 years in electrical engineering. Most people would call what I do freedom, and for the most part they'd be right. But there are days I wonder if the road gives freedom, or just hides what's been looking for you all along. This happened in early May. I was camped alone near Red Rock Canyon in Nevada. Not the one tourists know. This was east of Beatty, on the edge of where maps turn vague and cell signals drop into silence. I'd found the site off a dirt fire road that barely had tire tracks. I'd driven through a dry wash, climbed a shallow rise, and come out on a ridge where the land opened wide and broken. You could see 50 miles in every direction. No rangers, no power lines. Just sage, scattered Joshua trees, and rock that blushed orange when the sun sank low. There were 3 of us up there that evening. Me, a younger couple in a white Sprinter van, and an older guy with a tiny casita travel trailer who pulled in late and parked near the bluff's edge. I waved to the couple when I first got there, got a nod back. Never talked to the man with the casita. He didn't get out much. Just sat behind his rig in one of those old-school green lawn chairs, drinking something from a tin cup and watching the horizon like it owed him money. It was the kind of camp where no one bothers anyone, just distant figures, each caught in their own quiet story. That night was perfect. 72 degrees. Wind barely stirred. I grilled a few brats on my propane skillet, cracked open a cold one, and watched the Milky Way spread across the black like spilled chalk. The couple played music softly, Fleetwood Mac or something like it, barely audible through the air. Coyotes barked somewhere far off, and I remember thinking, this is as close to peace as a man like me deserves. I went to bed around 11, windows cracked for breeze, my dog Bear curled up against my legs. He's a mutt, half shepherd, half who knows what, but loyal like a second shadow. I fell asleep fast. When I woke up, the world was gone. That's not poetic. That's not exaggeration. I mean it literally. The world I'd fallen asleep in had vanished. I sat up in bed groggy, rubbed my eyes, and looked out the windshield. No Sprinter, no casita, no lawn chair, no tracks in the dirt where they'd been, no cigarette butts, no campfire remains, nothing. It was like they'd never existed. I got out of the rig barefoot, still in my boxers, half asleep, but already feeling that primal tingle, like something had gone fundamentally wrong in the fabric of things. You know that feeling when you wake up in a hotel and can't remember where you are for a moment? Multiply that by 100 and add the silence of a burial chamber. Bear didn't bark. He didn't even get out of bed. That was the second sign. Usually he's out the door before me, ears up, nose twitching. This morning, he just lay there, tail tucked, staring at the door like he expected it to open from the outside. I circled the camp once, twice. Nothing. Not a tire track. Not a single piece of evidence that anyone had ever camped within a mile of me. And I knew they had. I wasn't imagining them. I'd waved. I'd smelled their campfire. I'd seen the flicker of their lantern through my curtains. I got back in the rig and sat still for a long time. Then I did what any man trained in rational problem-solving does. I came up with theories. They left early. Maybe they were trying to beat the heat. Maybe they were early risers. Okay, but then where were the tire tracks? The dirt out there was soft. Any movement would leave imprints for hours. And even if they'd driven slow to avoid dust, there'd be something. Then the second wave of logic. Maybe I'd misjudged distance. Maybe they'd camped farther away than I thought, and what I saw was some sort of mirage. But I walked the site again. I knew where they'd parked. I even found the rock the casita guy had placed under his tire to level the trailer. It was still there, dry on one side, freshly turned on the other, but no trailer. I started to feel not afraid, exactly. Not yet, but rattled. That tight feeling behind your ribs that says, don't say it out loud or it'll become real. I thought about driving out right then, but something in me resisted. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. Or that darker part of the human brain that says, no, stay, find out what this is. So I stayed another night. I made myself busy through the day, cleaning, tightening a loose awning bracket, reorganizing my tool drawers. Bear barely left the rig. He stayed by the door, nose low, ears back, watching the open air like it had teeth. As sunset rolled in, I walked the perimeter of the ridge again. Still no sign. No one else had come. Not a single RV or van or tent on the whole horizon. The land stretched empty, golden under the dying light, too still. That's when I heard it, a single knock, not on wood, not on metal, but something in between. Like bone against fiberglass. Dull, slow, intentional. It came from behind the rig. I turned. Nothing. The hair on my arms stood up. I scanned the ground, the shrubs, the brush. Bear was at the door now, growling low in his chest, but not barking. That worried me more than if he'd gone ballistic. He knew something I didn't. I walked behind the rig with a flashlight, heart pounding, mouth dry. There were no tracks, no animals, no wind. But when I turned off the flashlight for just a moment, I thought I saw something down the slope. A shimmer. Like heat distortion, only it was dusk and cold air had already rolled in. It flickered, then was gone. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound stretched longer than it should have. The crickets stopped all at once around 1 a.m., and the silence that followed felt deliberate, heavy. I kept the flashlight by my side. I held Bear close, and I didn't close the curtains. And as the black stretched toward dawn, I kept wondering the same question over and over again. What if I'm not the one who stayed behind? What if they didn't leave? What if I left and just haven't realized it yet? Dawn came slow. It didn't spill over the land like it normally does out west. It seeped, dull and gray, like light coming through dirty water. The colors felt wrong. You ever see a sunrise that feels like it skipped a step? Like someone dimmed the world a notch too far and forgot to turn it back up? That morning didn't bring peace. It brought questions. Still no campers. Still no sound. Still that same open emptiness where people should have been. I made coffee. I stood on top of the ridge with my mug and stared out at the desert floor, scanning for movement, tents, tire marks, even just a dust plume in the far-off distance. There was nothing. Not even birds. Bear didn't want to leave the rig. Not to eat, not to sniff around. That's when I knew something more was going on. Dogs don't fake their instincts. He just stood at the window, tail stiff, head low, like he expected something to rise up out of the ground. I decided I needed to move. Staying was starting to feel like a gamble I hadn't agreed to play. But when I stepped around to check the tires and gear, something stopped me cold. There were footprints. Not mine. They were barefoot, adult-sized. Narrow, long. They circled the rig once, then again, getting closer to the door on the second pass. I followed them around the rear where they disappeared right into the hard-packed dust. No entry, no exit, just vanished, halfway through a step. I didn't sleepwalk. I didn't hallucinate. I've been on the road long enough to know when something's real. And those prints weren't old. They were crisp, fresh. The kind you leave just before sunrise, when the dew is still light and the dust clings like flour. I packed up fast. I didn't even eat. I shoved gear into cabinets, latched the drawers, pulled in the slide-outs, and fired up the diesel with shaking hands. Bear jumped into the passenger seat the moment I opened the cab door, like he'd been waiting. I started down the fire road, but something weird happened a mile out. The trail started changing. Trees I didn't remember seeing on the way in now lined the right side. Big cottonwoods, the kind that shouldn't be growing in that terrain. The wash I'd driven through was gone, completely. In its place was flat, cracked mud and dry brush. And the distant boats, they'd shifted. I swear to God, they weren't where they'd been the day before. The formations were similar, but wrong. It was like driving through a dream that pretended to be the waking world. I kept going, tells, then 15. The fire road turned to gravel, then to pavement, but not the one I came in on. This road had no markers, no mile signs, fences, just blacktop that stretched flat in both directions like a runway cut through scrubland. I pulled over, heart racing, pulled up the GPS, no signal. I tried the emergency band on my CB. Static. Tried the ham radio. More static, nothing but hiss like something whispering just outside of range. Bear whined. He kept looking behind us like something was following, though when I looked, I saw only dust. I drove. Faster now. 30 minutes, then an hour. Eventually, I found a junction with a small wooden sign. It looked old, handmade, like something you'd see in a state park before they upgraded to metal. It had one word burned into it, Ridgewell. I've driven every western state from Washington to Texas. I've mapped forgotten towns, hiked out to abandoned mining camps, even cataloged old civilian conservation corps sites from the 30s for fun. I've never heard of Ridgewell. I should have turned around. I should have stayed on the road, kept driving until I found a major highway or a gas station or a ranger outpost. But something in the name tugged at me. Ridgewell. It sounded familiar, like something from a childhood memory you can't quite place. I turned in. The road narrowed again, wound through rock, passed over a shallow gully with an old iron bridge. My mirrors scraped against overgrown mesquite and juniper. And then, just as the sun climbed fully above the ridge, I came out into a clearing. And there it was. A campground. Empty. Every site had an old, faded picnic table. Metal fire rings, mostly rusted, some with melted cans and beer bottles inside. But not a single camper. Not even signs of recent use. No people. No rigs, no tents, no trash. Just hollow evidence that people used to come here. And stopped. And yet, there were fresh tire tracks leading to every single site, as if someone had just left moments before I arrived. Even the dumpsters were half open, swaying slightly in the breeze. And over it all, this crushing silence like the whole place had exhaled once and never breathed in again. I parked the rig, left the engine running, stepped out. The air felt wrong. It wasn't temperature or humidity. It was texture, too still. Like the wind had been replaced with something holding its breath. Even my own exhale seemed to fall flat against it. Bear wouldn't get out. I checked the sign at the front of the camp. No dates, no rules. Just a map etched into a slab of cedar showing 12 numbered campsites in a rough circle. But one thing caught my eye. Just above the etched border of the map were words burned in jagged strokes. The morning belongs to them. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Them. I didn't know who they were yet, but I could feel them. Not in a supernatural way, not ghosts, not shadows, but in that animal part of me that hadn't been trained out by science. That primitive voice deep in the chest that says, "You've walked into a place you weren't supposed to find." I backed out slowly, got back in the rig, still no signal, still no sound. The only motion came from the wind in the grasses, and even that moved like it was being directed by someone watching. I started the engine again, turned the rig back toward the road, and that's when I saw the sign had changed. Where it had said Ridgewell, it now said, "Thank you for visiting. Please return before dawn." I swear it. Same wood, same style, same paint, but new words. I kept driving, heart thudding like a hammer in my chest. Bear panting fast and shallow beside me. I didn't stop again until I hit a Chevron station 3 hours later in a town I didn't recognize. The clerk didn't know Ridgewell. Neither did the map on the wall. The ranger station 30 miles up the highway had never heard of a campground near Red Rock Canyon that matched my description. But I know what I saw. And something tells me the campground didn't vanish at sunrise. It waited. And next time, I don't think it'll let me leave. I stayed off the road for 2 weeks after that, camped in an established KOA near Moab, somewhere with Wi-Fi, security lights, kids riding scooters between picnic tables, and the smell of burnt marshmallows in the air. Somewhere that felt unmistakably real. I needed the sound of human life. Bad country music from a Bluetooth speaker, the rhythmic slam of RV screen doors, someone yelling at their golden retriever to stop eating pine cones. Normalcy. Noise. But it didn't work. Every morning I'd wake up at first light with my heart pounding in my ears. I'd check the window, expecting empty sites where campers had been the night before. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been marked. Not haunted exactly, but noticed. I began researching, quietly, obsessively. Not online at first. The internet was full of theories, all useless. Aliens, parallel timelines, government experiments. I was looking for patterns. Events that weren't documented but whispered about. I searched local libraries, ranger station reports, even old tribal stories archived on microfilm. Places where digital eyes hadn't yet sanitized the past. And I started finding things. Not often, but just enough to keep the dread simmering. Disappearances in remote sites, people who'd been camped among others and were suddenly gone. Rangers chalked them up to wanderers getting lost or folks packing up early and not checking out properly. But when I traced the locations, cross-referenced satellite maps with old incident logs, I started seeing something strange. A shape. Every place where campers had gone missing sat within a loose, shifting boundary that spanned across desert Southwest lands. Not in a circle, not a line. More like a pulse, like something moving underneath the skin of the land, leaving pockets of emptiness in its wake. I made a list of all the campsites. Most were unknown, old, unofficial. Some had names you couldn't even find on Forest Service databases. And one name appeared 3 times in unrelated ranger logs, spread across 50 years. Ridgewell. No state park registration. No postal code. No proof it ever existed. But there it was, mentioned once in a 1973 disappearance report. Again, in an undated journal entry from a Civilian Conservation Corps worker in the 30s. And once more in a ranger's handwritten log from 1999 describing a cleared campground with fresh fire rings and no explanation for their presence. Each time, the ranger tried to return. Each time, Ridgewell was gone. I became obsessed. I knew I shouldn't. I knew the healthy thing would be to forget it. Keep to paved campgrounds, places with check-in logs and friendly hosts in red golf carts. But the mystery gnawed at me. And then I started having the dreams. They weren't violent, just wrong. Quiet scenes, empty campsites, bird song that sounded like words in a language I couldn't place. A fire ring still warm, but no sign of who lit it. Always the same feeling that something had left just before I arrived. Or worse, that it was still there, watching from inside the trees, waiting for me to notice it. I started waking up in cold sweats. Bear too. One night, I found him pacing in the rig, teeth bared, ears flat, growling at nothing. The way he used to react to thunderstorms, except the sky was clear, dead silent. That's when I knew whatever I'd driven away from hadn't let me go. It was still near. The last straw came 3 weeks later. I was camped in Colorado, a little pull-off on BLM land just outside a canyon. It was a familiar sight. I'd stayed there years ago. Had fond memories. That night felt normal. Clear stars, warm breeze. A couple camped a few spots down, waved at me, and shared some leftover chili from their fire. For the first time in a while, I felt okay. But when I woke up, yeah, you already know, they were gone. Again, not just gone, erased. Their fire pit had no ash. Their chairs had disappeared, no tire marks, not a single track in the dirt. Even the spot where they'd laid out a picnic blanket was covered in undisturbed dust. Only this time there was something else left behind. A folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper of my rig. No note, no handwriting, just a hand-drawn map, 12 sites, arranged in a loose circle. At the bottom in red ink, "Please return before dawn." It was Ridgewell. Again, I sat in the driver's seat for hours, the map in my lap, not moving, not breathing, just trying to make sense of what was happening. It wasn't just a place anymore. Ridgewell was following me or pulling me back, like I hadn't escaped, like I'd been loaned out. I didn't know what it wanted, but I started to believe something I didn't have the nerve to say out loud until now. Ridgewell wasn't a place you stumbled on. It was a place that chose you. And I had been chosen. I tried everything after that. Digital detox, smudging the rig with sage on the advice of a native friend from Arizona, meditation, sleeping with the lights on, Bear curled up at the door. Nothing helped. Every few days, I'd find a new sign. A knocked-over fire ring with 12 stones arranged in a circle. An old signpost with letters that rearranged when I passed by again. A weird hum on the radio, exactly at 5:17 a.m. And once, this still chills me, I found a snapshot pinned to a pine tree, taken from behind my rig in a spot I had been parked 2 nights earlier. The photo showed me and Bear sitting in the doorway watching the sunset. Something, had been there, close enough to see us. And I never heard a thing. That's when I stopped denying it. I told myself the truth I'd avoided since that first morning on the ridge. I hadn't left Ridgewell. Not really. Wherever I went, some part of it came with me, like a seed lodged under my skin. And every new site, every new lonely campground, it just grew a little more. It came to a head on the night of the storm, late June, somewhere outside Sedona. I'd been driving aimlessly for a day and a half, refusing to stop at any spot that looked too quiet, too perfect. Bear was restless, whining low in the cab, occasionally snapping his head toward the window like he saw something trailing us in the dark. I tried to rationalize it. Wind? Coyotes? Shadows? But the real truth sat thick in my chest. I was running out of places to hide. The clouds rolled in fast that evening, thick black thunderheads from the north, dragging rain like curtains across the valley floor. Lightning danced along the rim, illuminating jagged rock and distant silhouettes that didn't quite look like trees. By the time I found a gravel turnout off the old Verda road, I was too exhausted to keep going, too angry to be afraid. I parked, didn't level the rig, didn't unhook. I just sat in the dark with the engine ticking and the thunder getting louder, watching Bear pace like a caged thing. That's when I saw it again. A glow. Soft blue-white, low to the ground, like lanterns scattered across a clearing. My heart dropped. It wasn't headlights. It wasn't firelight. It came from the forest itself. I knew those lights. They were the same I'd seen flickering below the ridge weeks earlier when I'd first heard that strange knock behind my rig. I hadn't known what they meant then. I did now. They were camp markers. 12 of them, forming a circle, and right at the center, a shadow, human-shaped, standing too still. I should have driven away, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I'd had enough. Maybe I decided to end this the only way it could be ended. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped Bear's collar on, took my .38 revolver from the drawer, not because I thought it would help, but because it gave me just enough courage to move. The moment I stepped outside, everything changed. No rain, no wind, just a heavy, warm silence pressing down from above. The kind you feel in dreams right before the ground shifts. I walked toward the lights, Bear trembling at my side. With each step, the air thickened. Sound dulled. My footsteps barely crunched. Even my own breathing felt muffled, like I'd stepped behind some invisible curtain. The clearing opened like a wound in the forest. Dry grass, ring of lantern glow, and in the center a figure. It was the man from the casita. Same tan vest, same green lawn chair, same expressionless face staring into nothing. But this time he looked straight at me. His eyes weren't eyes. They shimmered like old glass, like windows filled with static. And when he opened his mouth, I didn't hear a voice. I heard wind. But it wasn't outside wind. It was wind inside my ears, rising and falling in a rhythm that spoke without words. He lifted one hand and pointed to the ground. At first, I didn't understand. Then I looked down and saw what he meant. There, in the middle of the ring, was a patch of scorched earth. 12 names etched into the soil in a language I didn't recognize, scratched deep like claw marks in dry bark. But the last name was mine. Everett James, carved in perfect block letters. I dropped the flashlight. Bear growled, deep and primal, every hair on his back rising. But the man didn't flinch. He simply stood and stepped back into the shadows between the lanterns and vanished. The wind came back all at once. So did the rain, so did the thunder, and the clearing, lights, markings, everything, was just gone. I stood alone in the storm, soaked to the skin, with Bear trembling against my leg, and the name still burning in my brain like it had been branded there. That was the night I stopped running, not because I'd beaten it, but because I knew now this wasn't about escaping. This was about understanding. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. Whatever Ridgewell was, whatever it is, it doesn't live on maps. It lives in the folds of silence, in the liminal cracks of morning and night, where time bends and place forgets itself. It finds people on the brink, the lonely, the drifters, the ones looking for something they can't name. People like me. It gives you a choice, not in words, but in presence. You camp, you sleep, you wake up, and things are missing. Sometimes it's just a neighbor. Sometimes it's your sense of direction. Sometimes it's your grip on reality. But the real test is what happens when you stay, when you don't run, when you step into the circle and see your name in the ground. I've been different since that night, more aware, more attuned. Every campground feels like a test now, every fire ring a marker. I know what to look for, the layout, the silence, the sense of intentional absence. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a knock, or find a single boot print where there should be none, or wake up and see the outline of 12 stones arranged in a pattern just outside the rig's door. And I never forget the words carved above that first Ridgewell map. The morning belongs to them. Because now I know what it means. Night is yours to doubt, to fear, to escape. But morning is theirs. And if you're still there when the sun breaks the ridge, they don't let go. I no longer travel like I used to. I still live in the rig, still drive, still camp, but I stay near people now, close to state parks, campgrounds with rules, rangers, noise. I know it doesn't matter. Not really. Not to Ridgewell. But it helps me sleep, helps me pretend the line between real and unreal still exists. Bear's older now, slower, but he still perks up at strange sounds. Still knows before I do when the air shifts, and it does shift more often these days. Like whatever Ridgewell is, it's waking up, or spreading, or remembering me, because sometimes I see it again. Not the full place, not the circle, but glimpses. In California, I pulled into a beachside campground just north of San Simeon. Nothing unusual. Kids laughing, surf pounding in the distance, the glow of campfires painting orange halos on the sand. I parked, grilled some fish, poured a drink, and just before bed, I took Bear for a walk. We passed a dune I didn't remember being there, and behind it, 12 lanterns, faint, distant, in a circle. I didn't approach, I didn't move, I just watched until they blinked out one by one. In New Mexico, it was a whisper. I'd woken early, before dawn, stepped outside to let Bear out. The air was still. My breath fogged, and then right behind me, clear as anything, "You're late." I turned. No one. No sign of footsteps but my own. My revolver was still in the drawer. I didn't go back to sleep. And last fall in Washington State, I met another traveler, older than me, lean, sun-creased skin and eyes like a man who'd been underwater too long. We shared coffee at a rest stop, talked about solar panels and engine conversions, and then, quiet as a breath, he said, "You ever wake up and the campground's gone?" I froze. He didn't smile, didn't wink, just looked out toward the forest and said, "Happened to me in Utah, 4 years ago. Thought I dreamed it." But then I found a photo in my glove box of a camp I don't remember taking. 12 fire rings, empty. My truck parked dead center. He showed me the photo. It was the same place I'd seen, the same layout. I asked him if he saw a name. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, on a post, I think, faded. But I remember, said Ridgewell. Never forgot it." We never spoke again. I never saw him after that, but it confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't alone. There are others who've seen it. Others who've been there. Some come back, some don't. And some, like me, never really leave. Because Ridgewell isn't just a place. It's a question, a test, a mirror. It shows up when you've stopped pretending, when the noise of life fades and something inside you finally whispers the truth, that you're lost, that you're looking, that you'd go anywhere to find meaning, even into the places that don't want to be found. And Ridgewell is waiting in that silence for the drifters, the forgotten, the ones who aren't sure if they're running from something or toward it. Sometimes I think about going back on purpose, finding that ridge again, parking in the same spot, sitting in a lawn chair like that old man in the casita, just waiting for the knock. Because maybe that's the final choice it offers. Stay long enough and you stop being a visitor. You become part of it, part of the silence, part of the morning. Maybe that's what happened to the others. Maybe that's what happened to him. And maybe that's what Ridgewell wants. Not your fear, not your body, but your presence, your attention, your acknowledgement that there are still places in this country, this wild, restless country, that belong to something else, that don't care about GPS coordinates or park permits or TripAdvisor reviews, places that only appear when you're ready to see them, places that ask one simple question: what are you really looking for out here? I don't know how many more years I've got on the road. Bear's getting tired, and truth is, so am I. But when my time comes, when the road narrows and the signs stop making sense, I think I'll head back into the desert, back toward Red Rock, or maybe some new place Ridgewell has hollowed into the world. I'll park, open the door, light a fire, and when the knock comes, I won't run. Because I finally understand some campgrounds don't vanish at sunrise. They become you. And the morning, it never really belonged to us at all. Story 2. I've always loved driving at night. There's something about the way the road curls into blackness, how the headlights catch the edges of trees like ghosts darting between dimensions. It's not about the thrill, not for me. It's the quiet, the way the world narrows down to the hum of tires, the breath of the engine, the rhythmic click of the turn signal, like a clock too slow to keep real time. That's why I took the long way up through Idaho. I had no destination, not really. Just the hunger for motion, for that steady hum of the road underneath my old Volkswagen Westphalia. She's a 77, rust-colored like dried blood, with curtains I stitched from flannel shirts and a bench seat that still smells like campfire, no matter how often I scrub it. I named her Clara after my grandmother. I know that sounds strange, but Clara's the only thing that ever felt solid after Mom died. That week, I'd been camping through Montana and drifting westward. No set route, no campground reservations. Just national forest roads, vague pins on a paper map, and the occasional quiet boondocking site marked by crushed grass and leftover beer cans. Most nights, I'd find some clearing, park, pop the top, and fall asleep to the sound of wind brushing against pine boughs. But that night, the one that started everything, I hadn't meant to stop. It was past 10, and the forest had taken on that particular kind of darkness you only get when the stars hide and the trees seem to grow teeth. My GPS had dropped signal hours before. I was supposed to be somewhere near the Salmon Chalice National Forest, following an old fire service road that wasn't even labeled on my map. Clara was low on gas, and my own nerves were starting to fray from too many hours of silence. Then I saw the light. At first, I thought it was a trick of the eyes, a shimmer of moonlight through the trees, maybe a hunter's lantern. But as I crested a ridge, the road opened into a wide overlook, and down below, nestled between the trees like a secret village, was a campground. It shouldn't have been there. I don't just mean it wasn't on my map. I mean it looked like something out of a travel brochure for a place that never actually existed. Rows of vintage trailers and colorful VW buses, strung with golden lights that swayed gently in the breeze. I could see picnic tables lit by little lanterns, kids chasing each other with glow sticks, couples swaying to faint music that seemed to come from nowhere. It was dreamlike, soft, warm. My first instinct should have been suspicion, but I was tired, I was alone, and that place, it felt like an invitation. I drove down slowly, the crunch of gravel beneath Clara's tires barely audible under the music drifting through the trees. As I pulled into the lot, a man waved me over, a tall guy in a faded red flannel with a gray beard and kind eyes. He didn't ask questions, just pointed me toward a flat spot near a little creek, smiled, and said, "You're welcome here." I didn't even get his name. I set up camp automatically, folded out the bed, drew the curtains, cracked a cold beer from the cooler. Everything felt safe. There were kids roasting marshmallows at a fire pit 20 feet away. A golden retriever rolled lazily in the grass. Someone was playing a gentle acoustic guitar near the center pavilion. I sat by Clara's open side door, letting the warm air touch my face, and for the first time in days, I felt completely still. No anxiety about where I was headed next, no static in my chest, no ache in the pit of my stomach that usually clung to me after too many miles. Just peace. I fell asleep listening to laughter. When I woke up, everything was gone. Not packed up, not relocated, gone. As if it had never been there at all. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It hit me like a slap, the kind of cold that doesn't make sense for July in Idaho. I sat up fast, banging my elbow on the cabinet, pulled back the curtain, and there were no campers, no lights, no people. Just a wide, blackened clearing surrounded by charred trees and silence so complete it hurt my ears. The grass was burned away, the picnic tables were ash. My tires sat in ruts of cracked earth, like they'd sunk into a long-dead campfire pit. I got out, barefoot, stumbling into the dirt. My breath misted in front of me. I walked the length of the clearing in stunned silence, brushing ash from a bent metal pole that might have once held up a sign. There was no music, no creak, no man in a flannel shirt. Only one thing remained, a rusty old lantern. It sat exactly where the fire pit had been the night before, half melted and blackened with soot. I picked it up and dropped it immediately, still warm. I told myself I was dreaming. I told myself it was exhaustion, dehydration, maybe a hallucination from bad altitude adjustment. I told myself a lot of things, but I couldn't ignore the tire tracks. Not mine, but dozens of them, all burned into the dirt like brands, like ghosts of campers who had come before me and vanished in the daylight. I left that place in a panic, driving for hours until I found a ranger station. The woman at the desk, a middle-aged local with hair pulled into a stiff ponytail, listened without saying a word. When I finished, she asked me for the coordinates. I gave her everything I remembered, every turn, every fork in the road. She looked them up. Her face went pale. "That area burned 6 years ago," she said quietly. "Old campground. It was closed to the public after the fire. Nothing's out there now but dead land. And trust me, there's no power grid anywhere near it. You wouldn't have seen lights." I laughed. I actually laughed, like an idiot. Told her maybe it was another site nearby. Maybe I'd gotten turned around. She didn't argue, but she didn't believe me either. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing the music, soft guitar, the clink of glass, a woman's laugh, cutting through the air like a knife. By the third night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That's the thing they never tell you about fear. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it offers you something beautiful, something comforting, and only later do you realize you've invited it in. On the fourth night, I went back. I told myself it was curiosity, that I wanted to prove it was real or wasn't, that I needed closure. But deep down, I knew the truth. I missed it. I missed the way that place felt, like home. And when I crested that same ridge just after sunset, the lights were back, twinkling like fireflies, swaying gently, waiting. I went back into the clearing, and this time, they remembered me. There was a girl roasting marshmallows at the same fire pit, now glowing with warmth and ringed by soft laughter. She turned her head slightly as I stepped out of Clara, her face lit orange by the flames. "You made it back," she said. I froze. "Do I know you?" She smiled but didn't answer, just offered me a fresh marshmallow on a stick. "You'll want to sit before it gets cold." There was no point in asking how she knew I'd return. No point in asking how the clearing had come alive again with trailers and laughter and music when I had stood in that very spot just 2 nights ago and watched ash fall like snow. Everything looked exactly the same, the picnic tables, the warm lantern glow, the man in the red flannel strumming that same guitar by the pavilion. No one looked a day older, but it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like memory. I sat. The marshmallow sizzled in the fire. A boy ran past me chasing a plastic dinosaur, giggling into the dark. A golden retriever barked happily. The scent of pine and smoked sugar wrapped around me, warm and strange. I asked the girl her name. She just stared at the flames and whispered, "Names change. Feelings don't." The fire popped and cracked. I looked around. No cell reception again. My watch was stuck at 8:41 p.m. I told myself I was dreaming, that this was some kind of lucid hallucination. But the heat of the fire was real. The marshmallow burned my tongue. I spent the whole night there. I wandered through the rows of parked campers and trailers. Some of them looked impossibly old, like vehicles from the 1950s that should have been rotting in a junkyard, polished to a gleam under string lights. I saw a man cooking stew over a tripod, stirring with a wooden spoon like we were still living in a century long gone. A group of teens played cards near the edge of the woods, whispering and laughing in low, rhythmic pulses, like their laughter was part of the wind itself. Nobody ever looked surprised to see me. Nobody asked who I was or why I'd come. It wasn't until the second hour that I noticed. None of them were new. Every face I passed that night, I'd seen it before. Maybe from that first night, maybe from dreams I couldn't place. But none of them were strangers, not truly. And every time I tried to talk to someone, really talk to them, their answers never made sense, like they were reading lines from a play I hadn't rehearsed. At one point, I stopped beside a bright orange camper with a pair of little paper lanterns hanging in front. A woman in a floral dress was sitting in a lawn chair, knitting a scarf that trailed all the way into her lap. "What is this place?" I asked her. "Seriously." She didn't stop knitting, just looked up at me with eyes like black glass and said, "It's not the place that matters. It's the hour." "What do you mean?" She leaned in slightly, her needles clicking slower now. "The world changes after dark. Doesn't matter where you are. It gets thinner." She smiled again, and for a second I could swear I saw smoke curling behind her teeth. I stumbled back to Clara just before sunrise. My hands were shaking as I shut the door behind me. I told myself I wouldn't sleep, but the moment I lay down, it felt like the world dropped out from under me. When I opened my eyes, it was day again, just like before. Everything was gone, but not like before. This time, Clara had been moved. Not far, maybe 3 feet to the left, but I always parked in the same spot, always chalked the wheels the same way. This time, the passenger mirror was cracked, the curtain on the back window tied in a knot I didn't remember making. My cooler was open. Half my food was missing. I stepped outside into that same blackened clearing, ash up to my ankles, the wind biting cold even though the sun was shining, and something was wrong. The trees felt closer. I know that doesn't make sense, but they did. Like they'd leaned in, grown taller, or maybe I was shrinking. Maybe everything was, and etched into the dirt in front of my front tire was a shape, a symbol almost, a crude spiral carved with something jagged and deliberate. It wasn't there the day before, not unless it had been covered in ash, but now it was deep, fresh, and unmistakably human. I drove away again, fast. Didn't stop for food, didn't stop for gas. I just kept going, past the ranger station, past any towns, back onto paved highways where things felt normal again. I told myself I was done. But each night I started dreaming about it. The laughter, the lights, the smell of pine and sugar. I'd wake up sweating, my hand reaching toward the dash to start Clara's engine. I'd find dirt under my fingernails when I hadn't left the van all day. One morning I woke up with ash on my shirt, another with a marshmallow in my mouth. I was losing time. And then something changed. About a week later, I stopped at a rest area near Boise. I needed to sleep somewhere public, somewhere I could hear trucks and vending machines and voices. I parked under a floodlight, locked every door, wrapped myself in a blanket like armor. At 2 a.m., I heard music, soft, distant, just beyond the trees. I opened the curtain and looked out. The woods were pitch black, nothing there. But the music kept playing, faint guitar, and underneath it the girl's voice, "You'll want to sit before it gets cold." I didn't open the door. I didn't move. I sat in silence until morning. And when I finally found the courage to step outside, there were footprints circling the van. Bare footprints, dozens of them, leading in from the woods, and in the center of the hood, carved shallowly into the paint, was the spiral the campground was coming to me. I tried to leave Idaho the next morning, didn't shower, didn't stop for breakfast. I just filled up the tank, pointed Clara west, and drove like hell through the high plains and winding canyons, trying to put miles between me and whatever was crawling through the night after me. But it followed. Not in the way you think. Not with headlights in the mirror or shadowy figures on the roadside. No, it followed me through the cracks, through sounds, through smells, through the thinning edges of night where reality starts to hum a little off-key. I passed into Oregon on the second day, and for a while, I thought maybe it was over. I pulled into a state park by the coast. Fog everywhere, the kind that sticks to your teeth. I hiked down to a beach where the cliffs curved like old ribs and tried to let the sound of waves bury the memory of what I'd seen. But that night, I woke to the smell of campfire. It wasn't mine. I hadn't lit one. And the fog had vanished. Instead, I saw the dim, golden shimmer of lanterns beyond the trees again, flickering low like candlelight behind a curtain. I stayed locked in Clara, every muscle wound tight, every part of me screaming not to look. But the music came anyway. No guitar this time. A record player, maybe. Slow, warped jazz as if from another room in another life. And faint laughter again, threaded with the echo of a child calling out, "Found you!" I put in earplugs. I turned on the engine. I didn't care if I looked crazy. I drove out of that site in my boxers, with the pop top still halfway up. By sunrise, I was parked behind a truck stop near Salem. Windows rolled down to prove to myself the air was real. The spiral was on the dash this time. Drawn-in condensation. One unbroken line, fogged into the windshield like a thumbprint that had always been there. I lost track of the days after that. Places started blending together. I would park at night in one town and wake up near another. Once I fell asleep by a quiet reservoir south of Eugene, woke up to find myself 30 miles east, pulled into a dirt turnout near some defunct ranger station with rusted-out signs and claw marks on the doorframe. Yes, claw marks. 3 long ones. Too deep for any bear I know. Too precise. And I swear I could smell burning flannel. I stopped going into towns, stopped using gas stations, started peeing in bottles just so I wouldn't have to leave Clara for more than a few seconds. But the spiral kept showing up, always somewhere new. In the condensation, in the dirt on the bumper, in the frost that gathered even when it wasn't cold. Like a countdown or a brand. And that's when I realized I didn't know what day it was anymore. I called my sister from a library parking lot in Bend. She picked up after 4 rings, said I hadn't texted her in almost 2 weeks. I told her I was fine, just off grid. She laughed and asked how Idaho was. Idaho? She said I'd sent her a postcard, a physical postcard, postmarked from Salmon, Idaho, but I hadn't mailed anything. Not since Colorado. I figured you just needed space, she said. The postcard said not to worry, that you'd found somewhere safe, somewhere peaceful. My blood went cold. What did it look like? Look like? The card, the image. She paused. It was a campground, she said finally. A really pretty one, with string lights, a bunch of little campers, fire pits. Honestly looked like something from a travel blog. I thought you were doing okay. I hung up on her. I know that sounds harsh, but I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the dashboard, at the cracked mirror, at my own eyes in the reflection. Tired, yellow-rimmed, like something had been draining the color out of me day by day. The spiral wasn't there that morning, and I thought maybe, just maybe, it had passed. But that night, I saw her, the girl, the one with the marshmallow. I was camped off a logging road deep in Willamette. No one for miles, no light, no sound, just the hiss of wind through pines and the occasional snap of a twig that kept making me flinch. I hadn't eaten all day. Then I heard a knock. Not on the door, not on the windows. From inside the van, 3 soft knocks, and there she was, curled up in the back seat, where I kept the emergency blankets and jumper cables, wearing the same clothes, same flannel jacket, same bare feet, black with soot. She looked at me with those distant eyes and said, "You'll want to sit before it gets cold." I screamed. I actually screamed, like a child. I flung open the door, stumbled outside, grabbed the tire iron, swung it in every direction. But when I turned back, the van was empty, like she'd never been there. Except one of the blankets was folded, and she had used my name. I never told her my name. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat in the driver's seat until the sun came up, and once it did, I drove straight to the coast. Parked at a bluff, let the salt wind slap my face until I felt human again. And I asked myself the question I hadn't dared ask before. What if the campground doesn't need a place? What if it just needs a time? What if it's not a destination but a door? What if night is the door? And what if I opened it? The signs were everywhere now. The way the van shook at dusk, even when the air was still. The way music would play on my old radio with the dial unplugged. The way people looked at me in gas stations like they could smell the smoke on me, like they could see it in my eyes. Then one night, I decided to stop running. I was already halfway gone anyway. I returned to Idaho, not to the same forest road. I couldn't find it anymore. The GPS gave me nothing, and even the ranger station was shuttered now, the windows blacked out, the desk inside covered in plastic like it hadn't been touched in years. But I didn't need coordinates. The campground found me. Just after 8:41 p.m., the lights flickered on behind the trees. The golden glow, the laughter, the music. And I drove toward it. This time, the road wasn't one I recognized. It curved like something half-remembered in a dream, a winding scar through the trees that shouldn't have been there and yet felt achingly familiar, like a childhood path you thought you'd invented. Clara rumbled over the ruts as the trees parted, and there it was again, the campground, lit in gold. No ash, no fire-blackened soil, just warmth, laughter, the faint sound of someone frying bacon, a man in a cowboy hat tending a smoker, someone playing banjo near a string of colored lanterns. The smell hit me like a wave, wood smoke, grilled onions, pine needles baked in sun. It was everything I wanted the first time I arrived, everything I'd been chasing through states, time, and the thin membrane between night and something else, and it welcomed me like I'd never left. No one looked surprised, no one asked where I'd been. I parked Clara beside the creek, just like before. The girl with the marshmallow waved without getting up. The man in the red flannel strummed the same, familiar chords, nodding like we'd seen each other yesterday. I should have screamed. I should have begged for answers. But I didn't. Because for the first time in weeks, the spiral wasn't chasing me. The silence wasn't heavy. The wind didn't whisper. I felt still. And part of me, God help me, was grateful. They fed me. Strangers with faces that felt like family. They passed me plates of roasted corn, smoked trout, warm cider in ceramic mugs that never seemed to run empty. Every bite tasted like memory, like something your mother made before she left or before you left her. Every face around me glowed with that same warm haze. But they didn't talk about the outside world. Not once. Not even in passing. Nobody asked where I was from. Nobody said Wi-Fi or news or the year. Conversations here were made of stories, soft, slow, circular ones that seemed to fold in on themselves. A man named Harlan told me about a bobcat that lived in the rafters of his camper and sang lullabies. A girl named Ella swore she'd been 9 years old for 3 summers straight. A couple whispered about the night the sky turned red and everyone just started dancing. They all spoke like they had time. Not in abundance, but eternally. That night, I didn't sleep in Clara. I left her doors open and followed the girl with the marshmallow. Her name, she told me now, was Junie, down a little path I hadn't noticed before. It twisted beneath canopies of ferns and low branches, past an old tire swing and into a grove where the air shimmered slightly like heat off asphalt. And there, beneath the trees, was a tiny A-frame cabin lit by oil lanterns and fireflies. "This one's yours now," Junie said, and her voice wasn't gentle anymore. It was final. I stepped inside. The bed was made. My name was carved into the wood above the headboard. Nate, in careful script, as if someone had practiced it a dozen times before getting it right. I laid down and fell asleep like I'd been waiting to all my life. But here's the thing. When I woke up, the cabin was gone, just like the campground had been. I was back in Clara, windows fogged, windshield cracked, ash coating the floor. Only now, something was different. There were people outside. Just their silhouettes, barely visible through the thick morning mist, standing, watching, not speaking, not moving, not threatening, not exactly, just present. I stepped out slowly, barefoot again. And as I approached the clearing where the fire pit had been, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. They weren't strangers. They were me. Versions of me. One with my college haircut and flannel jacket. One with the limp I'd gotten from the mountain trail in Colorado. One wearing my old Rie backpack I'd lost in Zion 6 years ago. All just standing there, all staring. I opened my mouth to speak. They whispered in unison, "You made it back." I ran. Through the woods, branches clawing at my face, lungs burning, but the path didn't lead anywhere this time. It circled back, every direction, always back to Clara, back to the spiral drawn in the dirt, back to the fire pit. Junie was waiting, sitting cross-legged beside the coals. "You don't get to leave every time," she said softly. "You already did that." I dropped to my knees, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. "What is this place?" She smiled like it wasn't the first time I'd asked that. "It's where you go when you finally stop running." "I don't understand. You don't have to." She looked over her shoulder toward the rows of campers flickering in and out of the mist, like mirages stitched into the air. "Some people find us after the end, some right before, some when they forget what day it is, but they all find us eventually." "Am I dead?" Junie laughed, really laughed, a sound so light and sharp it felt like it cut something inside me. "Not yet, but you're close enough that it doesn't matter anymore." I sat there, shaking, staring at the fire as it danced over coals that didn't burn down. That's when I realized something else. The sun wasn't rising. It was 5:43 a.m. My watch worked again. But the sky wasn't changing. No streaks of blue, no morning bird song, just the same dull ash-gray gloom. Timeless, borderless. That was 3 nights ago, at least I think it was. Time's not right here. Sometimes it's light, but not daylight. Sometimes the fire burns cold. Sometimes I see other newcomers, people with blank eyes and trembling hands, and we don't talk. We just nod, like we're all slowly remembering the same thing. I still sleep in Clara. She's the only part of me that still feels like mine. But every night, the campground gets a little more detailed. New lanterns, a new voice in the chorus, a memory stitched into the edge of the creek that wasn't there before. I don't know how many versions of me are out there now. I don't know which one got pulled in first, but I do know this. The campground only exists at night. And if you ever see it, if you ever crest a ridge and see those lights twinkling below you like stars tangled in the trees, don't go down there. No matter how warm it looks, no matter how long you've been on the road, no matter how much it feels like home. Because once you sit by that fire, you never really leave. I don't know what night it is anymore. Not because I've lost track of time, but because I think time finally lost track of me. You stop noticing things after a while. The changes, the shifts, the subtle ways the world reassembles itself when you're not looking. Like how the trees move when you're asleep, or how the faces around the fire begin to feel familiar, even if you've never spoken to them. You start to accept it. The way a dream becomes normal while you're inside it. You start to forget the sound of your own voice. Sometimes I think about calling my sister again, but then I wonder, which version of me did she get a postcard from? The one who ran? Or the one who stayed? Or maybe the campground sent it itself. Maybe it reaches through pockets of dusk and leaves fragments behind, little lies stitched together from the people who almost got away. Because I didn't get away. Not really. Oh, I leave the campground, sure. Some nights I wake up somewhere new. Oregon, Wyoming, Northern Nevada, and always alone. But it finds me again. Always. It appears behind gas stations, behind foggy windows of truck stops, behind whatever flimsy thing I've convinced myself is reality for the day, always just beyond the reach of reason, and always just before I fall asleep. I've stopped trying to explain it, because the longer you look at it, really look at it, the more you realize it's not a place at all. It's an invitation, and the invitation doesn't expire. Some of the others have theories. I've spoken to a few now, wanderers like me, folks who don't remember where they were born or when they stopped sending emails. There's a man named Boyd with a beard down to his chest who swears the campground is limbo. Not hell, he always clarifies, but not Earth either. Just a place for the ones who never settled. There's a couple who claim they died in a rock slide 10 years ago, but woke up here instead. There's a teenager who doesn't remember his own last name. And Junie? She says nothing now. She just watches the fire. Sometimes I wonder if she ever left, if she was ever alive, if she's just part of the mechanism, the way the music is, the way the coals never die, the way the spiral shows up when you're ready to listen, because I see it everywhere now, not just in ash or condensation, but in dreams, in patterns, in the way the wind moves through pine needles like it's carving a message you're not supposed to decode until your last breath. I saw it once on the surface of a lake at sunrise, a perfect spiral of ripples with nothing at its center. And lately, I've stopped running from it. Because here's the truth nobody wants to say. The road doesn't lead you away from the campground. It leads you to it. The farther you drive, the more lost you get. The more you think you're escaping, what you're really doing is drawing the spiral wider, until one night you find yourself back in the center again, back at the fire, back where your name is already carved into the headboard, back where they remember you, even if you don't remember yourself. And the worst part, it feels right. I've tried going home, truly. Last month, I think it was a month ago, I followed highways until I found the old neighborhood where I grew up. Parked Clara out front of my childhood house, same porch swing, same chip driveway, but the windows were black and there were no lights on, even though it was clearly evening. No cars, no sound, just silence, thick and wet like something breathing in your ears. I stepped onto the porch, knocked 3 times, and the door opened by itself. Inside there were no pictures on the walls. No furniture, just a single lantern sitting in the middle of the living room floor, flickering. And when I stepped inside, the door shut behind me. I ran, of course, sprinted down the street, but by the time I got back to Clara, she wasn't parked where I left her. She was waiting for me at the campground again, the fire glowing, music playing, a plate of food on the table still warm. I ate it. I sat beside the fire and said nothing. And Junie passed me a marshmallow. "You're remembering now," she said. And I was. Little things at first. The way my father used to sit in silence before dinner. The smell of wet canvas in the back of our old Coleman tent. The first time I ever camped alone and cried because I heard a fox scream and thought it was a woman dying. I remembered how I felt when I bought Clara. Not proud, just desperate. Like I thought if I kept moving, I'd outrun the grief sitting in my chest like a rock I couldn't cough up. That's when I understood. The campground doesn't want to hurt you. It wants you to stop running. It wants you to remember. All the parts of yourself you tried to bury under asphalt and pine needles and van life videos and tiny Instagram fires with smiling strangers. All the pieces you dropped along the road like breadcrumbs you didn't want to follow home. That's why it only exists at night. Because night is when you can't lie to yourself anymore, when the shadows stretch long enough to show you who you really are. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the scariest part isn't that the campground finds you. Maybe it's that it always knew where you were, that it was always waiting. And maybe I'll keep waking up somewhere new. Maybe I'll keep running just a little longer. But when I do finally stop, when the fire calls me back for the last time, I'll sit beside Junie. I'll roast one more marshmallow, and I'll tell the next lost soul as gently as I can, you'll want to sit before it gets cold. Story 3. I've always believed the Pacific Northwest had a soul, a living, breathing consciousness that settled into the cracks between its endless pines, soaking into the moss covered ground and whispering through the mist like a voice you weren't supposed to hear. And I don't mean that in a poetic sense. I mean it literally, because in October of 2021, during what should have been a quiet solo RV trip through Oregon and Washington, I heard something in those woods that didn't belong to any animal I know, and it nearly unraveled me. I was 43 at the time, divorced, worn out. My name's Mitch Holloway, and I've been full-timing in a 24-foot Winnebago Mini Winnie for about 2 years now. Back then, I was chasing solitude like it owed me a debt. I wanted peace, healing, maybe a little space from the noise of people and the guilt of a broken marriage. I'd spent that summer working odd jobs out of the rig, roofing in Idaho, some mechanical stuff up in Spokane, and by October, the trees started calling. Anyone who's traveled out west in the fall knows the draw. Cool air, golden light, the roads thinning out after tourist season. I planned a 2-week route, starting at the base of Mount Hood, then winding through Gifford Pinchot, Rainier, and into Olympic National Park. Mostly dry camping, all off-grid, real isolation, the kind where you feel the hum of your own blood in the silence. The first few days were exactly what I needed. No schedule, just me, the rig, and a landscape so breathtaking it made my chest ache. I'd park near remote trailheads, hike during the day, then cook simple meals back at camp, journaling and sipping bourbon as the sky turned indigo and coyotes howled in the distance. But it was near Trout Lake on the Washington side of Mount Adams that everything began to twist. There's a forest road, NF 88, that shoots off into deep wilderness. It's gravel, narrow, and barely maintained. And after about 10 miles, you hit a plateau with a wide clearing surrounded by cedar and fir. No cell service, no signs, just a flat patch of earth with room for maybe 3 vehicles. And beyond that, dense forest that feels older than anything you've ever known. I pulled in just before dusk, the last rays of sunlight slanting orange through the trees. The place felt sacred, like the ground itself was holding its breath. There were no other campers, no fire rings, no beer cans or wrappers, pristine, untouched. I chalked the eeriness up to being alone in such a raw place. I even smiled as I shut off the engine. I thought, this is the kind of silence I came for. That night was quiet. Too quiet maybe, but I slept like a stone. It wasn't until the second night that something changed. I'd just finished dinner, a can of chili and some cornbread I'd made on the stovetop, when I heard it. A low knock against the back of the RV. Not a branch falling, not a raccoon. A deliberate, measured knock. 3 times, like someone using their knuckles on the rear wall. I froze mid-bite. The knocking stopped. Now, this is the moment when every instinct you've buried under logic starts to wriggle up through your chest. I'm a rational guy, raised on science, not superstition. But in that moment, my hands started shaking. I flicked on the exterior lights. Nothing. Grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, circling the rig slowly. My boots crunched on frost-laced pine needles. No tracks, no people. Just the wind high up in the trees and the eerie stillness of the clearing. Probably an animal, I muttered, mostly to myself. Tree branch, temperature, shift. Just noise. But I didn't sleep well that night. The following morning I found something strange. About 30 feet into the woods, directly behind where I'd parked, the undergrowth had been disturbed, flattened in a perfect circle, maybe 6 feet wide, like something had been sitting there, watching. No prints, no drag marks. Just this impression in the ferns and leaves, damp and darker than the rest of the forest floor. I walked back to the RV feeling like I'd swallowed a mouthful of ice water. That night, the knocking returned. Louder this time, more insistent. Then footsteps. I'm not exaggerating. I heard them, light but deliberate, circling the rig once, then again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I killed the lights and crouched behind the kitchenette, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I gripped the handle of the hatchet I kept stowed under the bed, waiting. And then silence, until the whispering started. It wasn't clear. just this soft, breathy sound like someone mouthing words too faint to catch. It came from right outside the driver's side window. I stayed like that, frozen in the dark for what felt like an hour. Then, slowly, the whispering faded. The woods went still again, and somehow I slept. Shallow, fevered dreams filled with dark shapes and eyes peering from trees. When dawn came, I stepped outside, trembling. No footprints, no signs of a person or even an animal. But above the windshield, written into the condensation with a fingertip, were 3 letters. Run. That was it. Just run. All caps, dripping with moisture, already fading in the morning sun. I snapped a photo on my phone even though I had no signal, no one to send it to. It was real, and I'd had enough. I packed up fast, adrenaline propelling every motion. Dumped the gray water, stowed everything secure. I didn't even make coffee, just fired up the engine and backed out of that clearing like the devil himself was behind me. But here's the thing, and this is the part that's hard to explain. As I drove back down the forest road, something shifted in the air. My ears popped, like the pressure had changed, and the deeper I got into the trees, the less real everything felt. The road began to look unfamiliar, though I'd driven it twice. The trees pressed in closer, darker, thicker. Every bend looked the same. It felt like I was being swallowed. I started sweating despite the cold. Checked the GPS. Nothing. Just a blinking dot in a sea of gray. I glanced in the rearview mirror and my stomach turned to stone. Someone was standing in the clearing behind me. Far away, thin, dressed in black. Perfectly still. I slammed the gas. Didn't care if I blew a tire or cracked an axle. I needed to get out. And then, just like that, the road spit me out onto pavement. Clear sky, asphalt, civilization. But I couldn't breathe right. My whole body shook. And when I looked back, the forest road was gone. I mean gone. Not gated, not hidden, vanished. As if the forest had swallowed it whole. And I wasn't even halfway through the trip. I should have driven straight to a motel, should have gotten a hot shower, called someone, grounded myself back in reality, but I didn't. I just kept driving. Numb, blinking, jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I told myself it was a mental snap. Maybe stress, maybe sleep deprivation, too much time alone. My brain clawed for logic like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. But that night, I camped again. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want fear to win. Maybe because part of me was still in denial. But mostly, I think it was pride. I'd lived 2 years on the road without incident. I wasn't about to run scared because of one bad night. So I drove toward Mount Rainier, away from the gorge and up toward a small campground near Ashford, Cougar Rock. It's public, usually open into mid-October depending on snow. No hookups, but flat spots, pit toilets, and thick canopy overhead. I figured it was still wild enough to feel remote, but close enough to people to shake the sense of isolation. When I pulled in around 5, there were 3 other campers scattered across the loop. A couple in a Sprinter van, a solo hiker in a Subaru with a roof tent, and a beat-up Class A parked under a massive cedar tree that looked like it belonged in a cathedral. I picked a spot near the entrance, under a slope of fog-draped pines. It felt better. I told myself that over and over as I leveled the rig and set out my chair. There were voices in the distance, the soft murmur of propane stoves firing up, the smell of instant coffee and pine sap. Normalcy, reality. But I still didn't sleep. Around 1 a.m., something woke me. Not a noise, not a light, just this presence. Like when you're dreaming and suddenly realize you're not alone in the room anymore. I sat up in bed and listened. Nothing. And then, faint, almost delicate, the sound of a zipper being undone. Not from my rig, from outside, from one of the other campsites. It wasn't loud, just that familiar sound of metal teeth sliding down fabric. I figured maybe the guy in the rooftop tent needed to pee. But then it happened again, and again. 3 distinct zippers, 3 tents or entryways being opened one after the other. That's when I noticed something worse. The whispering was back. Not loud like before. Softer. More spread out, almost like the trees were murmuring. It came from all sides, a shivering, echoing ripple across the dark forest. I tried to tell myself it was wind, but there was no breeze. The trees didn't move. I stayed under the blanket, straining my ears. The whispering grew louder, but it didn't sound like language. It was broken, fragmented, like syllables pulled apart and looped endlessly. Then I heard footsteps, not around my rig, but moving between the campsites, steady, crunching, passing from one to the next. I glanced out the small back window. Through the foggy glass, I saw a figure walking slowly between the trees. No flashlight, no gear. Just tall and narrow, moving wrong. Almost like their joints bent slightly backward, arms stiff at their sides. They passed the Class A, the Sprinter, then stopped at the Subaru. And that's when the screaming started. It was short, a single burst, high-pitched and full of sheer panic. Then silence. I threw on my boots and grabbed the hatchet again. I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I couldn't just sit there. I yanked open the door and stepped out into the freezing night. Fog clung low across the ground. My breath steamed out in quick bursts. I jogged toward the Subaru. The tent was still zipped up. Nothing seemed out of place. But the side mirror was cracked, like something had hit it hard. I tapped on the door. Nothing. I circled the car. No blood, no signs of struggle, and no person. I called out, quietly at first, then louder. Still nothing. The tent remained still. I checked the other rigs. The Sprinter was locked, lights off, same with the Class A. No one moved. No one came outside. I was alone. And that's when I saw something I still can't explain. In the center of the loop, where the access road splits into two curves, there's a tall post that once held a metal sign. But now it was bare, rusted, just a skeletal beam in the mist. And at its base, something had arranged dozens of small stones in a perfect spiral, a spiral that hadn't been there when I arrived. I stared at it for what felt like hours. When I finally turned to go back to my rig, I felt eyes on me. That sensation of being watched from multiple angles, like prey. My skin crawled so violently it felt like it would peel away. I didn't sleep at all that night. Just sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, watching the woods slowly rotate through fog and shadow. By morning, the spiral was gone. So was the man in the Subaru. I asked the camp host, a woman in her 60s with a German Shepherd and a mug of black coffee, if she'd seen the Subaru leave. She squinted at me. "No Subaru here," she said flatly, "just you and the Winnebago." I wanted to argue, but I stopped myself. Maybe I'd cracked, maybe this whole thing was in my head, or maybe she was lying. I didn't know what was worse. I left within the hour, told myself I'd camp near people, real people. I made a reservation at a KOA north of Olympia. Hookups, neighbors, civilization. It helped, for a while. But the dreams didn't stop. Always the same. Fog, spirals, whispers in broken syllables. A figure watching me through the trees. Sometimes a face, long, hollow, with eyes that bled shadow. Other times I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of that zipper still ringing in my ears. I started avoiding forest roads altogether. Stuck to the coast, camped near towns, bought extra locks, left the exterior lights on all night. And for a few weeks, things quieted down. The paranoia faded. I started breathing normally again, until I hit the Olympic Peninsula. I was near Forks. Yes, that Forks, staying at a campground nestled beside the Hoh River. It was damp and beautiful, with moss hanging like curtains from every branch and the soft sound of running water easing me to sleep. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. Because that night, long after the sun had gone down, I went outside to dump the trash, and the zipper sound came again. Only this time it was coming from my own storage bay, and something was already crawling out. At first, I froze. I didn't scream, didn't move, not even to drop the trash bag I was holding, because my mind couldn't compute what I was seeing. The storage bay on the passenger side, the one I kept locked with a key, was hanging open, and something long and pale was slithering out, slow and unnatural, like it had too many joints and not enough muscle. It didn't look human. Not entirely. The leg, or arm, or whatever it was sickly white and thin as a branch, twitching as it reached for the gravel. I watched the way its fingers scraped across the rocks, crooked, discolored, each nail blackened at the tip. There was no sound except the shh skin dragging over the inside of the compartment like wet canvas sliding over bone. That snapped me out of it. I dropped the trash, spun around, and ran. I didn't care that it was pitch dark, didn't care that I was in nothing but a flannel and joggers. I just sprinted across the campground like a deer in headlights. My boots hit the dirt path toward the host cabin near the front gate, but halfway there I tripped over a root and went down hard. My knee hit the gravel, tearing open on impact. I didn't even feel it. I just looked back. The bay door was wide open now. But the thing, it was gone. I scrambled to my feet, every nerve in my body screaming. I didn't go back to the rig that night. I stayed huddled under the overhang of the ranger station until the sun came up, shaking like an animal left in the rain. When the host finally found me, he said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told him I thought someone broke into my RV. He went back with me. There was nothing inside. No sign of forced entry. No footprints. The bay was locked again. Key still in my pocket. Nothing stolen. Nothing damaged. Just the faint scent of something rotted, like old leaves soaked in stagnant water. That and the trash bag I'd dropped was shredded open. Every piece of garbage torn up like it had been sorted through with claws. I packed immediately. Left my water hose behind. Didn't care. At that point, I wasn't worried about recovering. I was trying to survive. I cut the rest of the trip short. Drove south, fast, back toward the Columbia River. I passed towns I'd planned to visit, Port Angeles, Aberdeen, Longview, and didn't stop, didn't sleep. Just kept pushing the Mini Winnie down the I-5 corridor like it was a lifeboat, and the woods were swallowing the ocean behind me. But the nightmares followed. Every night, something new. Not dreams like before. These were visits. I'd wake up gasping for breath, certain I'd heard someone whispering my name from the other side of the RV wall. Or the sound of something small and wet crawling under the floorboards. It didn't matter where I camped. Hookups or not, KOA or not. There was always a presence, and I started seeing symbols, not spirals anymore. These were different, crude markings scratched into tree bark or left in dust on my rig's windshield, shapes I didn't recognize. Triangles inside circles, lines drawn in sets of 3, always 3. I started researching forums, Reddit threads, backwoods lore sites, anything I could find. One post stood out. It was from a guy who'd camped near the Gifford Pinchot Forest, not far from where I'd started this whole nightmare. He described a series of hollow walkers, figures that appeared in the woods at night, too tall, too silent, always watching. They didn't speak in words. They whispered in fractured language. Sometimes they left symbols. Sometimes they marked people. His account ended abruptly. No follow-up. But his last post said, if you see the spiral and hear the whispering, it's already too late. You brought them with you. They cling. They mimic. They nest. That word stuck with me, nest, because deep down, I knew whatever had crawled out of that bay, it hadn't just passed through. It had been riding with me. Somehow, somewhere along that trip, I picked up a passenger. And I don't mean a hitchhiker. I mean something ancient. Something that doesn't need your permission to come in. And it wasn't done with me yet. It took weeks to get out of Washington entirely. I drifted south through Oregon, then into Northern California, staying close to cities. My bank account started draining. I stopped working, stopped taking calls, even stopped updating the travel blog I'd used to document my journey. Every time I thought about writing what happened, something stopped me. Fear. Shame. Or maybe something more subtle, like a hand resting gently on my shoulder, guiding me into silence. I reached Redding by Thanksgiving, parked behind a Walmart for the night, and that's when I made the biggest mistake of the whole trip. I opened the storage bay. I don't know why. Some gut instinct. Like an itch I needed to scratch. Inside was mostly what I expected. Tools, cables, old hiking gear. But tucked into the far corner in a dry, shadowed gap behind the water tank was something I'd never seen before. A bundle. Wrapped in old cloth. Tied with cord made of something rough like animal hair. I pulled it out, laid it on the concrete under the security lights. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it. Inside was a piece of bone, human maybe, carved with the same markings I'd seen on trees, and next to it, a lock of hair. Not mine. Dark. Coarse. Still damp. I threw up right there behind the rig. When I looked up, there was a man standing in the edge of the lot, too tall, too still, no face, just there. And then he was gone. I don't remember the rest of that night. I must have blacked out, because when I came to, the bundle was gone, and my storage bay was clean, like it had been scrubbed. But the scent remained, that same rotted forest floor smell, like death left out in the rain. And from that night forward, I started hearing it, not in dreams, but in waking life, the whisper. Not words, but rhythm, 3 syllables, always 3, sometimes behind me, sometimes inside the rig, sometimes from the storage bay while I'm driving. It's July now. I'm in Arizona, desert, open sky, no trees, no fog, no whispering, but I still sleep with the lights on, still check the bay every night. And once, just once, last week, I found the spiral scratched into the dirt behind my tires. That's when I knew. You can leave the Pacific Northwest, but it doesn't always let you leave. When you live in an RV full-time, the idea of home becomes fluid. It's a road beneath your wheels, a pull-through spot with a view, a Walmart parking lot at 3 a.m. But after what I brought out of the Pacific Northwest, that idea warped. Every space started to feel borrowed, like I was squatting in places where something else already lived, and I think it knew I was running. I stayed off the forest roads entirely after Arizona, traded the whispering pines for cacti and sand. There's a starkness to the desert that made me feel safer. Fewer places to hide, fewer things to fear in the shadows. I stayed near Quartzsite, then down into Yuma, always moving, always looking over my shoulder. I tried to tell myself the worst was over. But denial is a hell of a drug. There's a dry lake bed just west of Gila Bend. It's popular with boondockers, wide open space, nobody around for miles, great visibility. I parked there on a Sunday afternoon, the sky bruised with distant storm clouds, the air dead still. No one else in sight, just my RV sitting in the middle of that cracked earth, the horizon stretched thin and ghost-like. And for a moment I felt peace. I opened all the windows, turned on some music, cooked a hot meal. Just me and the silence, the way it used to be before everything went sideways. That night I even watched a movie, something stupid and loud, something to drown out the static in my brain. I thought maybe I'd finally outrun it. But right before bed, I stepped outside to brush my teeth, and there it was. Again. The spiral, not drawn in dirt this time, etched into my passenger side window. 3 perfect coils, each smaller than the last, carved into the condensation from my breath. I hadn't seen the window fog up. It was dry, arid, no dew, no moisture. But the spiral was there, like a tattoo burned through the glass. I stared at it for a long time, my toothbrush still in hand. And then, faintly, so faint, I might have imagined it, I heard it again. Whisper back, like breath, like thought. Not quite sound. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dinette, lights on, knife on the table. Every few hours, I'd walk the perimeter of the rig with my flashlight. Nothing, not even coyote tracks. But in the morning, I woke up slumped against the table and every cabinet in the RV was open. Every single one. Even the ones I know I locked. I don't remember falling asleep. Don't remember dreaming. But the feeling in my chest when I saw those open doors, that was something primal. Like being inside a home where the walls had shifted behind your back. Where something else had walked through while you slept. I left the desert that day, headed east. Texas, then Louisiana. It followed me, sometimes in subtle ways, a light flickering that had never flickered before, my leveling jacks retracting on their own. Other times, louder. Once, outside of El Paso, I heard 3 knocks on the roof in the middle of the night. When I climbed up in the morning, I found a patch of soot-black residue, shaped like a handprint. Too large to be human. I stopped telling people. The few friends I had left from my travel blog days either thought I was spiraling or worse, they didn't reply at all. Like whatever I was carrying could be passed through words. I even tried a pastor once. Met him at a gas station outside of Shreveport. He saw the look on my face, pale, shaking, sunburnt, exhausted, asked if I was okay. I broke. Told him everything. Not the whole story, but enough. He put his hand on my shoulder and prayed, quietly, earnestly, and then his hand jerked back like he'd touched a stove. He looked at me, not with pity, but with something else, recognition. Son, he whispered, you got something ancient on you. I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. He didn't answer, just crossed himself and walked away. That night, it came inside. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I'd locked every door, shut every window, slept in the driver's seat with the keys in my hand, ready to flee. And still, I woke up cold. Not AC's too high cold, cave cold, tomb cold, the kind of temperature that doesn't make sense in southern Louisiana in spring. My breath fogged in the cab, and standing in the kitchen was the shape. Not clear, not solid, just there, tall, crooked, moving slowly, like a reflection in broken glass. Its head turned toward me, but I couldn't see eyes. Just darkness. Like its face had been erased. It lifted one hand and pressed it against the wall. 3 fingers, long, knuckled the wrong way, and then it whispered. But this time I understood the words. Let me in. I must have screamed. I don't remember doing it, but I must have. Because the next thing I knew, I was on the side of the highway, the RV pulled over, hazards on, heart racing so fast I thought it would kill me. The rig was empty, no marks, no symbols. But when I went to start the engine again, the radio turned on by itself, full volume, and the only thing it played was static. No station, just white noise. And under that noise, barely audible, the whisper again, over and over. Let me in, let me in, let me in. I turned it off, yanked the fuse, didn't matter. The whisper was inside me now. It's been 4 months. I haven't stopped moving. I stay in crowded places, RV parks, truck stops, motels, anywhere with people. But even then, sometimes at night I see the spiral, not just drawn or scratched. Sometimes I dream it, sometimes I feel it on my skin, like it's been branded onto my shoulder blades while I sleep. I wake up drenched in sweat and feel phantom lines under my shirt. Raised. Hot. I've started getting nosebleeds. Sometimes when I walk past reflective surfaces, I don't see myself blink. I've thought about burning the rig, just setting the whole mini-winnie ablaze and walking into the desert with nothing but the clothes on my back. But here's the thing. I don't think it would matter, because it's not in the RV. It's in me. Whatever I let in back there, in the cold fog of those Washington woods, it never left. It's just waiting, patient, wearing me like a mask. And every time I close my eyes, I swear I hear the zipper, unzipping from the inside. I don't talk to my family anymore, haven't for a while. Not because they did anything wrong, but because I don't trust myself around them. I think that's what this thing does. It doesn't kill you right away, it waits. It hollows you out, like termites in an old log, quiet, methodical, always chewing. And one day you go to lean on the thing and it crumbles in your hand. That's what I've become. A shell held together by habit and fear. And I can feel the inside getting softer. When I look in the mirror now, my eyes seem a little off, like they don't track quite right. And sometimes when I smile at strangers at truck stops or grocery stores, they don't smile back. They just look at me, like they're not sure I'm real. Or maybe like they can see what's standing behind my eyes. I've tried every angle to shake it. Religion, science, ritual. I even visited a reservation up in New Mexico, hoping someone, anyone, could make sense of this. A Navajo man in his 70s let me speak with his aunt, a medicine woman. She was nearly blind and smelled of cedar ash and salt. She held my wrist for a long time, didn't say a word, then let go and whispered something to her nephew in their language. He looked at me and shook his head. She says you didn't bring it, he said. You woke it. I asked what that meant. He hesitated. She says it sleeps in land no man owns. It hates noise, hates fire, hates forgetting. When you went into its place, you didn't see it, but it saw you, and now it follows. I asked if there was a way to send it back. His eyes didn't waver. She says the door opened, and once it opens, it doesn't close. Not by human hands. I drove out of that reservation like a man with nothing left to lose. Because that's the truth of it. This isn't just a haunting, it's an infestation. and not one that ends with some big final confrontation. There's no epic battle, no secret ritual to cast it out. It doesn't play by human rules. It just wants to be near you. It feeds on proximity, and the longer it stays, the more it learns to wear you. The last time I saw it fully, was outside of Amarillo, middle of nowhere, in a rest stop with 6 trucks and 1 busted vending machine. I was sitting on the bumper of the rig, smoking, trying to remember what it felt like to be normal. And across the lot, under a sodium light, it appeared. Not walking, not arriving, just present. Like it had been there the whole time and I was only just noticing. It was taller now, or maybe I was shrinking. The same long limbs, the same crooked posture, but now it wore something new. A piece of me. My jacket. The one I lost somewhere in Oregon. It was draped over its frame like a mockery. Too tight, too short for something its size, but it wanted me to see it, to recognize it. That's what it does. It mimics. It tries to be you. And it's getting better at it. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but when I woke up, I was inside the RV, lying in the bed, covers tucked neatly around me. The door was locked, lights off, everything still. And the jacket was folded on the passenger seat. I didn't move for hours, just stared at it, waiting for something to happen. It never did. That was a month ago. Now I'm in Florida, the furthest I can get from the Pacific Northwest without leaving the country. I stay near cities now, crowds, concrete. I try to drown the whisper in noise and light. But sometimes in the moments between distractions, I feel it. The zipper tugging open inside my chest. My thoughts getting quieter. Like someone's pressing down on them, dampening them, molding them. It's not dramatic, not violent, just steady. Like water against rock. Sometimes I forget where I'm driving, or why. Sometimes I look at my hands and they don't feel like mine. Other times, and this is the worst part, I feel fine. I laugh, I smile, I think I'm over it. But deep inside, something smiles with me. Something waits. It's not always claws and shadows and symbols. Sometimes it's just a feeling in your gut that something is wrong, but you can't name it. That you're watching your life through a pane of glass you can't break. That something is moving behind you in the mirror just a second too late. If you've ever camped in the Pacific Northwest, deep in the moss-covered silence under trees older than your ancestors, maybe you felt it too. That hush, that pressure, that sense that the forest isn't empty, that it's listening. Maybe you heard the knocking. Maybe you told yourself it was nothing. Maybe you never noticed the spiral. I hope you never do. Because if you do, if it sees you, then you'll understand what I'm trying to tell you. Not all things that follow want to hurt you. Some just want to become you. Slowly, patiently. And they start with your silence. So if you're watching this from a remote site in Oregon or Washington and you hear something tap against your rig tonight, don't open the door, don't check the mirror, don't answer the whisper. Because by the time you hear it, it's already inside. Story 4. I pulled into the campground just after dusk. The ranger station was closed, but I'd made my reservation weeks ago. Loop B, site number 11, supposedly one of the more secluded spots along the lake's eastern ridge. I'd been chasing solitude for months, and the idea of a place like this, tucked into the pines with the edge of the water brushing up just 30 feet away, seemed like exactly what I needed. The air was thick with the scent of wet bark and something faintly metallic, like rusted tools left in a shed too long. My tires crackled over gravel as I eased my Class B van onto the pad. Nothing fancy, just a modest white rig I'd gutted and rebuilt myself. Solar panels, cedar cabinets, cot bed, tiny propane heater. It was enough. I didn't need much anymore. Not after Portland. Not after everything. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was almost aggressive, like it didn't want to be interrupted. No breeze, just the low chirp of frogs and something hollow echoing across the water. A distant call, maybe a loon, or maybe nothing at all. I stepped out, stretched, and looked around. Most of the other sites were empty. A few flickers of light deeper in the woods, campfires or maybe lanterns, but not close. and none of them came from site number 9. Site number 9 was visible just beyond mine, maybe 60 or 70 feet up the loop. The sign on its post was old, splintered down the middle, the 9 just barely clinging to the paint. According to the reservation system, it hadn't been booked in months. Yet when I glanced toward it that first night, I noticed a faint glow, soft and low, like a battery-powered lantern through frosted plastic. It was gone by the time I looked a second time. That first night, I chalked it up to nothing. Maybe a reflection, maybe the moon, except the moon was only a sliver and behind cloud. By morning, I'd forgotten it. I spent the first 2 days writing. I set up a folding table by the van, stared out at the lake, and tried to rebuild the pieces of the manuscript I'd abandoned last winter. It came in fragments, characters I no longer believed in, dialogue that felt stiff, hollow. I wasn't sure if it was the story or if I just didn't have a story left in me anymore. By the second night, that glow at site number 9 came back. It flickered this time, like someone had adjusted the wick or passed in front of it. Again, by the time I walked a few feet closer and peered through the trees, nothing. No lantern, no fire, no movement. Just a cleared patch of forest floor with an old concrete pad barely visible through the pine needles. The site looked like it hadn't been used in years. I told myself it probably hadn't. The next morning, I found footprints near my van. Not boot prints, not the thick, waffle-soled kind that hikers or rangers leave behind. These were softer, shallower, barefoot maybe, toes slightly splayed, as if someone had walked around during the night, circling my van, stopping near the fire ring. They vanished into the pine needles about 20 feet out. I followed them until they dissolved. I didn't sleep that third night. There are different kinds of silence in the forest. Some hold you, some breathe with you. This one watched. Every creak in the canopy, every gust of wind that didn't move the branches, it all pulled at my nerves like thread. At 2:17 a.m., I remember the time exactly, I heard something metallic rattle. It wasn't loud, just a small mechanical twitch, like an aluminum latch shifting in a breeze. It came from site number 9. I didn't move. I stayed in my van, curled in the sleeping bag, pretending to be somewhere else. Somewhere with streetlights and wall outlets and cheap insulation that dulled the edges of sound. When I finally got the courage to look through the window, there was nothing. No light, no movement, no one. I told myself out loud that maybe someone had shown up late, maybe a hiker or a wild camper who just didn't check in. But the next day, I drove back down to the ranger station just to check. The woman behind the glass flipped open the reservation binder when I asked. "No," she said without hesitation. "Site 9 hasn't been open in years. Drainage issues. Ground's not stable." I asked if someone could be staying there anyway. She looked up at me a little too quickly. "No," she said again. "There's no one up there." Her tone didn't say, "You're imagining things." It said, "Don't ask again." I almost left that day. I loaded up the van, even got as far as the dirt road out past the last bend of Loop B. But something made me stop. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was that stubborn, stupid part of me that needed to know it was just my imagination, that I hadn't spent too long alone. I went back, unloaded, lit a fire. The glow returned that night, but this time it was brighter and higher off the ground, like it had been placed on a table. I watched it from my fire pit for almost an hour. No movement, no shadows, no sound, and then just after midnight, it vanished. No dimming, no fade, just gone, like a switch had been flipped. In the morning, I walked over to site number 9. I don't know why I hadn't done it sooner. I think part of me was afraid of how ordinary it might be. Or worse, how real. The site was overgrown. Ferns curled up through cracks in the concrete, and the fire ring was rusted to the point of crumbling. But sitting just inside the pad, where the underbrush thinned slightly, was an old Airstream trailer. I froze. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I would have noticed the aluminum shell, the way it caught the light, the way it reflected the trees in long, distorted curves. It looked lived in. The steps were down. The curtains were drawn. And there was a chair, an old nylon camp chair facing the lake. I stood there for a long time, listening, waiting for movement, for sound. There was none. Finally, I approached, slowly, calling out as I went. Hello? Anyone here? No answer. The door was shut, but not locked, and something told me, check inside. Just a glance. Just enough to prove to myself there was nothing. So I opened it, and inside was silence, not emptiness. Silence, the kind that feels deliberate. There was a lantern on the counter, still warm. The bed was made neatly, and on the small fold-out table beside a weathered camp logbook was a pen, still wet with ink. I opened the book, and on the last page, my handwriting, my name, dated that morning. But I hadn't been there. I know I hadn't. I don't remember writing it. But it was mine. Every curl of the G, every angled T, the slant of the letters, the weird way I loop my R. I stared at it for a long time, thinking maybe I'd blacked out. Maybe I sleepwalked. Maybe this was a joke I was playing on myself. The entry was short. Arrived just after dawn. Site in good condition. Airstream intact. Will stay longer this time. That was it. No signature. Just my name printed at the top like it was a habit. Like I'd done this before. I stepped back outside, blinking at the light like I'd come up from underwater. The lake shimmered a few dozen yards away, still and cold and perfectly flat. I listened. Really listened. And that's when I noticed something else. There were no birds, no insects, no frogs, just the wind. It didn't move the trees, not really, but it whispered through them. Not like a gust, not like a storm, more like words that forgot themselves. I returned to my own sight in a daze, mind spinning through every rational possibility I could come up with. Some prank, a forest maintenance worker with the same name, a mirror-writing twin I'd somehow forgotten about. But the only real possibility I couldn't shake was that I had written it, that somehow I'd been here before. I went back through my journal entries from the past few weeks. My notebook was full of loops, phrases I'd written and rewritten, sentences that repeated. The word return showed up 8 times across 2 pages. I couldn't tell if I was writing it into the story or trying to tell myself something. I didn't leave that day. I should have. But the idea of leaving while I still didn't understand, while this mystery hung in the air like a cut power line, felt worse. I thought if I stayed one more night, I could settle it, clear my head, find proof that I wasn't unraveling. But the woods had already decided. That night the lantern glowed again, brighter this time. It didn't flicker. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, and sometime after midnight, the wind shifted. It carried something new. Whispers, like someone talking just beyond my hearing. Words I couldn't make out, but they came in a rhythm, 4 beats, a pause, 4 beats again. I wrapped myself tighter in the sleeping bag and stared at the ceiling of the van. I thought about turning the key, just driving until I saw streetlights again, but I didn't. Instead, I laid there, paralyzed. Then I heard it, footsteps, not heavy, not fast, just deliberate, circling the van again, slower than before. They stopped at the back door as a long pause, then a sound like a fingernail tapping metal. Once, twice, 3 times. I held my breath. Didn't move, didn't even blink. Eventually the footsteps faded, and when I looked through the rear view, the glow at site number 9 was gone, replaced by darkness. The next morning I found the back doors of the van unlatched, just slightly, as if they'd been opened a fraction of an inch and then shut again without sealing. There were no footprints in the dew, no signs of forced entry, nothing out of place, except one thing. The camp logbook from the Airstream? It was now on my dashboard. Same leather cover, same ink stains on the spine, and inside, a new entry, dated today, same handwriting, but not my words. You'll come back again, you always do. My hands were shaking as I read it. My first instinct was to burn the thing, but instead I took it and drove straight to the ranger station. Same woman, same glass. I told her everything, showed her the book. She looked at it for a long time, then slid it back across the counter without a word. You should leave, she said softly. I am leaving, I said, but I want to know what this is. What the hell is going on up there? Her eyes flicked toward the trees behind me, then back to my face. Site 9's been closed since the 1980s, she said. A man lived there, alone, in an old Airstream, kept to himself. She paused. They found him in '88, died sitting up at the table, looked like he'd just written in his logbook. What happened to the trailer? I asked. They removed it, she said, years ago. I told her I'd been inside it. She didn't flinch. I believe you, she said, but you need to understand something. Her voice lowered. That site doesn't stay empty. People don't always come back, but sometimes they don't really leave either. I left before noon. Didn't pack. Just threw everything into the van and drove. Didn't even look back. I was on the highway before I realized I'd taken a wrong turn. Should have been headed south toward Eugene, but the sign said I was headed east, back toward the Cascades. And when I stopped for gas, I noticed the time on the pump was wrong, 3 hours behind. My phone had no signal, no GPS, no clock, and in the back of the van, lying right on my pillow, was the camp logbook, open to a blank page. And the pen, it was uncapped, ready. I drove for hours, didn't eat, didn't stop, except to piss behind a tree when the pressure was too much. Just kept the van rolling along, logging roads, gas station blacktops, winding state highways. But no matter which way I turned, no matter what road I took, nothing felt like escape. And the strangest part, I didn't see another car. Not once. No taillights, no headlights, no semis, no motorbikes, not even parked cars in driveways, just trees. Miles and miles of fir and pine, leaning just slightly in toward the road like they'd been waiting. By mid-afternoon, the sky had that flat gray glare that made it hard to tell where the sun was. I thought about heading west, toward the coast, where at least the sea could cut through this feeling of being watched. But I didn't, because I saw a familiar turnoff, one I swear I'd never seen before. And I took it. Not on purpose, I just did. My hands moved the wheel and I let them. And about 15 minutes later, I was back at the campground. Loop B, site number 11. The van rolled to a stop like it was coming home. There was no logic to it. I knew I'd been driving for hours. The tank was almost empty. I'd passed signs for 3 counties. And yet somehow here I was again. I stepped out of the van like I didn't have a choice, like the ground had a gravity all its own. There were new footprints near the fire ring. Barefoot again. A second set, this time smaller. One set walked in a circle. The other stood still like it had been watching. I didn't call anyone. Didn't take a photo. I don't know why. Maybe I thought no one would believe me. Maybe I thought someone would believe me, and that was worse. Site number 9 was glowing again. Not just the lantern, the whole trailer. The aluminum body shimmered with a soft yellow pulse like something breathing just beneath the surface. I stood at the edge of the site for what felt like hours, watching it, listening. That's when I noticed it. The sounds. At first, it was the rhythm of the wind again. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats. But then it changed. The pattern grew irregular, started to mimic footsteps. Crunch, pause, crunch, crunch. Longer pause. Then the sound of the trailer door creaking open, but I could see it hadn't moved. Still closed, still locked. And yet I could hear the hinges, the groan of old metal, the distinct thunk of it swinging shut again. Then a voice. Faint, as if it came through layers of static. At first I couldn't make out the words, but then just as I turned to go back to my van, I heard my own name. Clear as day, spoken in my voice, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken. From inside the trailer. I ran back to the van, locked the doors, and sat with my hand hovering over the ignition. But I didn't start it. Something in me wanted to wait. Not fear. Not paralysis. It was curiosity, or something pretending to be. The logbook was still there, still open, only now the page wasn't blank. Another entry. Not dated. No signature. Just a sentence. You're remembering now. That's when I lost it. I grabbed the book, marched straight back to site number 9, and threw it onto the steps of the Airstream. It landed with a flat thwack against the metal, and the trailer door, it creaked open. Just a few inches. Just enough to see the inside again. The lantern was lit. The table was set. And on the table, laid out like an offering, was a stack of notebooks. My notebooks. Filled with entries I didn't remember writing, same handwriting, same pen. Dozens of them. One for every year since 1988. I stepped inside. I don't know why. I wish I could say I was pulled in, hypnotized, possessed, something that would make it not my fault. But the truth is simpler, more terrifying. I chose to. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped, like walking into a cellar. The air was thick, damp, with the scent of rotting cedar and cooled metal, tinged with the faintest note of mildew, old air, the kind that only settles where no one breathes. I didn't sit, didn't touch anything, but I looked. Each notebook was dated in pencil along the spine. 1988, 1990, 1993. Not every year was there, but most were. Decades of entries, all by a hand that matched my own. Same pressure points, same ink bleed, same smudged page corners where I turn with my thumb. And every one of them started the same way. Return to site number 9. Same as before, but something's different. Sometimes the entries stretched on for pages, other times just a sentence, but each year told the same loop. Arrival, doubt, investigation, return, always return. I pulled one from 2006 and skimmed through a middle page. Met the ranger again. She didn't remember me, told me site number 9 was condemned after the man died here. I asked who he was. She said no name was ever recorded, but I remember the name. It was mine. I sat down. Not because I wanted to, but because the weight of it hit me all at once. I had been here before, not just once, again and again. Enough times that the journals filled a shelf, each visit wiping the one before, each time ending with the same lie, this time I'll leave for good. I grabbed the most recent one, this year, the one I shouldn't have had time to write. It was nearly full. The last page had fresh ink. It was still drying. I ran my finger over it, and there, in words I didn't remember writing, I saw the truth. The trap isn't the trailer. It's the story, and I keep telling it. The moment I read that, something in the air shifted. Not loud, not violent, just a subtle drop in pressure, like the forest inhaled and didn't exhale. Outside, the wind picked up, and it carried a sound. Not a voice this time, not even footsteps. It was rhythmic. Slow, like an old manual keyboard. Spacebar, backspace, letters tapping themselves into place. It wasn't coming from the airstream. It was coming from my van. I bolted out, half tripping down the trailer steps, heart in my throat. The wind hit me square in the chest, cold, sour, pulling at my clothes like fingers. I reached the van, yanked the side door open, and there it was, my laptop, lit on. The screen glowed in the dark cabin, casting long shadows across the walls, and on the screen, line after line of text scrolled by. My story. Not a draft. Not notes. This story. Everything, word for word, since I'd arrived at the campground, except it didn't stop. It was still writing, new sentences forming at the bottom, descriptions of what I was doing in real time. I waved my hand. The screen updated. He waved his hand, disbelieving. But part of him knew. I slammed the lid shut, the screen went black. The typing stopped, but not the sound. It kept going, now from behind the van. Same rhythm, same beat, like keys being punched into air. I turned slowly and saw nothing, just the lake beyond the tree line. Still, flat, reflecting nothing. And yet, the sound continued, coming from nowhere and everywhere. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat with my eyes wide open, waiting for daylight. But the darkness didn't lift. It just lingered. For hours. Time didn't move the way it should have. The hour hand on my dashboard clock ticked forward, then back. My phone battery hovered at 3% the entire night. And the laptop, when I opened it again, the document was gone, replaced by a single prompt. Tell it again. Say go or ready when you're ready for the next part. By morning, if it was morning, the sky had lightened, but the sun never rose, just a dull slate gray leaking between the trees. I told myself I was leaving, that this time I would actually go. Not just get in the van and drive in circles, but go. I started the engine. The hum was a relief, familiar, grounding. I backed out slowly, watching site number 9 through the side mirror. The airstream stood motionless, no light, no sound. No presence. But as I turned onto the loop's exit road, I saw something in the rear view. A man, standing beside the trailer, hands at his sides, staring straight at me. I didn't stop, didn't blink. I kept driving until I hit the gravel junction, and then I turned left, away from the forest, away from the lake. For the next hour, I followed every road that led downhill, every sign that pointed to a state highway. I didn't look back until I reached a diner, middle of nowhere. Parking lot cracked and overgrown, a few rusted pickups out front, but no movement inside. Still, I needed to eat. Needed to sit where there were chairs bolted to floors and laminated menus and ketchup bottles on every table. I walked in. The bell above the door jingled like it was underwater. The place smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. A waitress behind the counter gave me a slow glance, then nodded toward a booth. No words, just the nod. I slid in, picked up the menu, and froze. It wasn't a menu. It was my journal. Same brown leather cover, same creased spine, same smudge in the bottom right corner from where I dropped it in the fire pit a year ago. I opened it. The pages were blank, except for one, the center page, and scrawled across it in huge looping script were the words, "You made it this far last time too." I closed it, heart pounding. The waitress came over, pad in hand, eyes flat. "Coffee?" she asked. "Where am I?" I said. She didn't answer right away. Then, "You'll remember." "I don't remember," I said. "I've never been here. I was just camping." Her eyes lifted slowly to mine, and for a split second, I thought I saw myself looking back. Tired, hollow. "You should get going," she said softly, "before it starts again." I left money, don't remember how much, and walked out into the parking lot. The van was gone. Not stolen, just gone. No tire marks, no oil leak, no indentation in the gravel. Just an empty space where I knew it had been. I looked around, panicked, called out, no answer. That's when I saw the trailhead, just beyond the diner. A small wooden sign I hadn't noticed before, barely clinging to its post. Site number 9, 1.3 miles. No arrow, no trail name, just those words. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the wind picked up again, that 4-beat rhythm. 4 steps, pause, 4 steps. Coming up the gravel behind me, I turned, but there was no one there. Only the sound, the shape of a presence without the form. And then I heard it, a new sound. Different this time. A slow, deliberate tearing. Paper, like pages being pulled from a book, one by one. Back inside the diner, I ran to the door. It was locked. I banged on the glass, saw movement behind the counter, not the waitress. Something else. It stepped into view, a silhouette of a man, same height as me, same shape. He opened my journal and began to write. I saw the pen move, and then I heard my own voice, speaking from nowhere. This is how it always ends. I backed away from the door. Fast. I didn't want to see what came next. Whatever was writing in that journal, whatever version of me was standing in that diner, I wanted no part of it. But as I stepped back, my boot hit something soft. I looked down. A backpack. My backpack. The same one I kept tucked behind the passenger seat in the van. Same frayed straps, same burn mark near the zipper. I knelt slowly, unzipped it, already knowing what I'd find. Inside, my water bottle, my flashlight, a half bag of trail mix, and the map. The printed campground map I'd picked up from the ranger station on the first day. I unfolded it on the hood of a rusted truck nearby, hands trembling. Only this time, it wasn't just a map of the campground. There were notes, written in my handwriting, dozens of them scribbled around the perimeter. Don't trust the sky. Don't trust the sky. If she says leave, leave. The van never really leaves. You are the one repeating, not the place. And in the center, circled over and over until the ink bled through the page. Site 9 isn't a place. It's a memory. I stood there for a long time, trying to breathe, trying to remember what I came here for in the first place. The book? The writing? No, that wasn't it. I came to be alone, to find quiet, to escape the noise of what I'd left behind. But the noise had followed me, just changed shape. Now it wore pine needles and wind, and my own reflection in the windows of a trailer that didn't exist. I took the map and the bag and turned back toward the trailhead. Maybe I thought I'd walk the 1.3 miles and find the real source of it all. Burn the trailer to the ground, bury the journal, say the name of the man who lived there, and finally break the loop. But as I stepped onto the trail, the light shifted. Suddenly the sky was darker, like a storm had rolled in, but the air hadn't changed. No wind, no smell of rain, just shadow. And in that shadow, the sound returned. Footsteps, but this time not behind me. Beside me, matched to mine, one for one. Each crunch of gravel answered. I stopped. They stopped. I turned slowly. No one. Just trees, but my skin burned, every hair on my arm standing up like static. And then a whisper, inches from my ear. You're almost ready. I ran, didn't think, didn't plan, just ran for what felt like miles. But the trail didn't change. Same bend, same split in the cedar tree, same broken sign. Every time I passed it, I thought, maybe this is the one. But it wasn't. The trail was folding in on itself, a loop with no center. Or maybe I was the loop. When I finally collapsed, gasping, knees in the mud, I looked up through the branches and saw the lake again. Perfect. Still, mirroring the trees, and there on the far side was the airstream, just where it always was. But this time, there was smoke rising from its chimney, thin, blue. A fire had been lit. I don't remember walking there, just that the trees bent back to let me through, that the pine needles quieted underfoot, that the wind sounded like my name. And when I stepped back into the trailer, it smelled like home. Warm cedar, coffee, and something sweet I couldn't place. There was a new journal on the table, blank, waiting. The pen beside it was uncapped, and written across the top margin of the first page, now start from the beginning. I didn't sit, not right away. My knees ached from the trail, lungs raw from the run, but still, I couldn't bring myself to lower into that seat. The same seat he died in, or I died in, or maybe both. Instead, I ran my fingers over the wood grain of the table. Real wood, not laminate. Smooth from years of use, faintly oily with the touch of hands that had returned too many times. I looked at the blank page, the pen beside it, the way it waited for me. Part of me wanted to throw it across the trailer. Another part wanted to obey. That scared me more than anything else, because that part didn't feel foreign. It felt inevitable. I turned it from the table, half expecting the door to be gone, replaced by a blank wall or another window. But it was still there. Still open. The lake shimmered through it, unmoving, unbroken, like glass over stone, and in its reflection, I saw something I couldn't explain. Not me, not a copy of me, but a progression. Dozens, hundreds of me, all frozen mid-step, all looking back over their shoulders at the same trailer, some younger, some older, some with beards, some bleeding, some carrying journals in their hands. None of them looked forward, not one. I backed away from the door, shut it, and sat. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew it was the only direction left. The pen was warm in my fingers, familiar, like coming back to a language I hadn't spoken in years. I touched it to the page and stopped, because I heard something from outside, not footsteps, not wind, something else. Typing, again, only louder now, closer. I stood up, pressed my ear to the wall, and realized it wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from underneath, from beneath the trailer, like a typewriter buried in the earth, punching out keystrokes into the dirt, one letter at a time, and then silence. One heartbeat, two. Then a voice, not mine, not quite, but close. Older, fainter, worn out around the edges like a cassette that's been played too many times. You're not the first. I turned, expecting to see someone at the door. But the voice wasn't coming from there. It came from the radio, a busted CB mounted above the sink, the kind they stopped making decades ago. Its dial was lit, faint green, crackling with static like someone was trying to tune it in from 1,000 miles away. I reached for it. Before I touched it, the voice came again. You've told this story more times than you can count. Then silence. Then, but this is the first time you've listened. The radio went dead. The green light faded, and the lantern in the trailer dimmed until only a halo remained. I sat again, looked down at the page, blank. Except now, just below the top margin, a sentence had appeared, written in a hand shakier than mine. If you finish it, you'll forget again. I don't know how long I stared at it. The truth settled in slow, like fog rolling into a valley you didn't even realize you were in. This place wasn't cursed. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't alive. It was repetition. It was story. And I was feeding it. Every time I wrote, every time I remembered, every time I told it again, even in warning, I was anchoring it, holding it open, becoming the next chapter in something that never ends. I stood, picked up the journal, took it to the fire pit outside, lit the match with shaking fingers, watched the flame catch at the edges, curling the paper like dead leaves. The ink bubbled, the leather cracked. I waited for a scream, for the sky to rip open, for the earth to shake, but nothing came. Just smoke and silence, and then the sound of my van engine starting. From the road I turned, ran to the loop, and there it was. Parked just where I left it, headlights on, engine running, driver's door open, waiting. I didn't hesitate. I ran like hell, gravel skidding under my boots, smoke still trailing behind me from the burning journal. The van looked impossibly solid in the misty air, like something real dropped into a painting. I reached the door, yanked it wide. Inside was warm. Not like before, not the chilled breath of whatever had crept through the seams at night. This was dry heat. Familiar. Human. The scent of pine and old vinyl and the faint lingering smoke from the cedar incense I used to light when I was still trying to be a person who meditated. It was mine. It was real. I climbed in and shut the door hard, as if slamming it could trap whatever madness had followed me. I didn't look in the rear view. I didn't care what might be standing in the mirror. I just grabbed the wheel, foot to pedal, and tore out of the loop with gravel spitting beneath the tires. As I drove past the turnoff for site number 9, I didn't look left, didn't need to, because I felt it watching. Not a figure, not a ghost, the place itself, the silence, the hunger, the loop tightening its grip one more time as if to say, we're not done. But I didn't slow. I didn't stop until I hit pavement, real road, state road, painted lines, signs with towns I remembered from actual maps. At a diner an hour later, a different one, I sat in the corner booth and ordered pancakes and coffee and didn't even flinch when the waitress handed me a menu. Paper. Sticky from syrup. No journal, no messages. When I asked her the date, she gave it without hesitation. A Tuesday. 2 days later than I expected. And when I checked my phone, full bars, GPS, signal, a dozen missed notifications, nothing sinister, just the world catching back up, like I'd been gone for a weekend, and not years. I drove for 2 days straight, south, then east, ended up somewhere in Idaho, parked beside a flat stretch of desert highway, just me and the stars and no trees to whisper through. I thought about throwing the laptop into a ravine, but I didn't. I thought about writing it all down, really writing it, not feeding it. But I didn't do that either. I told myself I'd move on, and for a while I did. I lived. I drank coffee at gas stations and listened to podcasts and waved to other RVers at trail pullouts like I was just another guy passing through. And I was. Until this morning, when I woke up before dawn in a desert campsite with no trees, no lake, no forest, and still there was pine scent in the air, wet needles, cold earth, and on the windshield scribbled in condensation, "You didn't burn the first one." That's when I realized the truth. There wasn't just one journal. There never had been. And even if I burned 100, there would still be more. Because the story wasn't trapped in a book. It was trapped in me. I didn't move for a long time, just sat there in the driver's seat, watching the last curls of condensation vanish into the rising sun, wondering if it had actually been there, those words, or if I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew better. The scent of pine in a desert basin was proof enough. I slid out of the van. The air was already warming, desert wind brushing across my skin, dry and clean. No lake, no forest, no fog, but the feeling was back. That low, humming presence, like someone exhaling just behind your thoughts. I walked a slow circle around the van, expecting to see another backpack, another trailhead sign, a fresh set of barefoot prints. Nothing. Until I opened the rear storage hatch. Buried beneath the gear I hadn't touched in weeks, folding table, extra water jug, tangle of extension cords, was a box I didn't remember packing. A wooden one. No markings, no latch. I didn't want to open it. But I did. Inside, a stack of notebooks, old, weathered, familiar, each labeled with a year, 1988, 1993, 1999, 2011, 2025, my name on the inside covers, my handwriting every page. I staggered back, knees buckling as I sat hard against the bumper. This wasn't just repetition, this was documentation. The loop was deeper than I thought, longer, older. I'd been writing this story for decades, living it, losing it, finding it again. Burning the journal did nothing. Telling the story only fed it. And silence just gave it room to grow. So what was left? How do you break something that writes through you? I stared at the notebooks until the sun was high enough to bleach out the shadows. Then I gathered them all, every last one, hiked up the nearest ridge with a view of nothing but scrub brush and blue sky, dug a hole with my hands, fingers raw and bleeding, dropped them in, but I didn't light a match, didn't bury them, didn't walk away. I sat beside them, and I started talking, not writing, not typing, talking, out loud, no structure, no story beats. Just words, just memory. I said everything I could remember, the glow of the lantern, the voice on the radio, the footsteps, the echo of my own name in a voice that wasn't mine. I spoke until my throat cracked, until my breath stuttered, and when I finished, I looked down into the box. The pages were blank, all of them, white as bone, the ink gone. I left the box on that ridge, empty, carried nothing back but the dirt under my nails and the blood drying on my palm. When I returned to the van, the windshield was clear. No words, no fog, no scent of pine. The air smelled like dust and heat and possibility, and for the first time since that first night in Site Number 11, I believed I might be free. But freedom is fragile. It doesn't announce itself. It waits, quiet, breathless, to see what you'll do next. So I'm telling you this now, not as a story, not for effect, not to scare you, but because someone has to hear it without feeding it. Because if you ever find yourself at a lakeside campground in Oregon and Site Number 9 is empty, leave it that way. Don't go near it. Don't look at the trailer. Don't listen when the wind says your name. And if you see a notebook waiting on a table, don't pick up the pen, not even once. Because the wilderness doesn't just test your body. It tests the story you tell yourself to stay human. And if you forget that, you won't leave either. You'll just keep coming back. Like I did. Like I might again. Like maybe I already am. Story 5. I've always thought the desert could keep secrets better than most places. Maybe it's the silence, how it swallows everything, even the sound of your own thoughts. Or maybe it's the distance between gas stations, towns, voices. When you're deep in the Southwest, out past the edge of the map where cell signals vanish and the road turns to gravel, things just change. The rules loosen. And for a while, you forget you're part of anything civilized. I was 2 weeks into a solo road trip across Arizona and New Mexico in my '87 Volkswagen Vanagon. I'd quit my job a few months earlier, told myself I needed space to breathe. The truth is, I was trying to outdrive a kind of grief I didn't have words for yet. It wasn't about anyone dying. It was worse in some ways. That hollow loss of self, like the skin you'd been wearing for years, suddenly didn't fit anymore. So I went west, thinking I'd find some clarity in the stillness of the desert. And it was working. For a while. I'd spent nights parked under sweeping stars in BLM lands, drinking coffee brewed over a propane stove, jotting half-baked thoughts in a battered journal. Nothing profound. Just lines like, what if the quiet is where you actually live? Or are we afraid of being alone or afraid of what we find when we are? That kind of thing. But on the 17th day, I ran out of peace. Not because I lost it, but because I went looking somewhere I shouldn't have. I was driving south from Gallup when I saw the sign. Faded wood, mostly bleached white, nailed to a leaning post by the side of the road. Coyote Flats RV Park, 5 miles, it said, with an arrow pointing off a cracked old side road. I don't know why it caught my eye. Maybe because I'd been driving for 4 hours straight. Maybe because my water tank was nearly empty. Or maybe, probably, because part of me wanted to feel something besides this slow drip of apathy. I should have trusted that feeling I got when I turned off the main road. The Vanagon shuddered slightly, like it didn't want to go either. The road narrowed into a single dirt lane, chewed up by years of weather, rimmed by brittle sagebrush and the occasional petrified fence post. The GPS turned into a blue dot hovering over beige nothing. There were no tire tracks, just dust. After a couple miles, I noticed something odd. The silence here wasn't just deep, it was wrong. Normally, even in the most barren parts of the Southwest, there's a background hum insects, birds, the faint wind dragging itself over the rocks. But this place, nothing. It was like someone hit mute on the world. Even my own breathing felt loud, invasive. I slowed to a crawl as the remnants of the RV park emerged on the horizon. A rusted gate hung half open, its hinges creaking in the light breeze. Faded plastic flags fluttered above, their colors long gone. A crumbling sign leaned against a pole. "Welcome to Coyote Flats. Stay a while." The exclamation point felt like a threat. There were maybe 10 pads in total, arranged in a haphazard semicircle around what used to be a central building, probably the office and bathhouse. The roof sagged, shingles scattered across the dry lot like brittle leaves. No other vehicles. No people. Just my van, idling like it didn't know if it should keep going or run. I parked near the edge, under what little shade a dying mesquite could offer. The heat was brutal. Pavement warping, tongue-drying heat, and I could feel it through my sandals the moment I stepped out. I glanced around. No movement, no voices. But that stillness, it wasn't peace. It was held breath, like the land itself was watching. I needed water, and the idea of filling up my tank before heading back felt logical enough. I grabbed my canteen and made my way toward the main building. As I passed by the first pad, I noticed something strange. There were items left behind. A folding lawn chair, collapsed but intact. A child's shoe, sun-bleached and half-buried in dust. A coffee mug sitting upright on a picnic table like someone had just stepped away. Inside the office, everything was layered in dust and spiderwebs. A cracked clock read 2:17, though it wasn't ticking. Papers lay scattered across the counter. Guest forms, emergency contact sheets. The names were faded, but I could make out a few. Rodriguez, 2 nights. Thompson, indefinite stay. Benton family, arrived 6:14. No years listed, just dates, and some of them weren't crossed out. No checkout. I moved cautiously into the back room. Cabinets hung open, a cot against the wall, still made. Someone had lived here. That's when I heard it. A soft clink, metal on metal just outside the building. I froze, every hair on my arm standing upright. I waited. Then again. Clink, clink, clink. Like someone tapping a spoon against a railing, irregular and sharp. I edged toward the nearest window, careful not to shift the floorboards too much. Peering out, I saw nothing, just the empty loop of pads, my van in the distance. But the sound continued. Not close, but not far either, like it was moving around the perimeter of the camp. I thought about leaving right then. I wanted to. But there's a stupid kind of pride that comes with solo travel, especially when you're trying to prove something to yourself. I told myself it was probably some loose cable or wind catching a piece of metal. Nothing sinister. I walked back outside, scanning the area. The wind had picked up slightly, tugging at the dry grass in uneven gusts. The sun was sinking now, casting long shadows across the camp. The place looked even more haunted under that dying light. I filled my water tank from the cracked spigot near the bathhouse. Surprisingly, it still worked, though the water smelled faintly metallic. That's when I noticed a trailer half hidden at the far end of the park. Unlike the others, it wasn't falling apart. It wasn't new, exactly, but it looked lived in. Curtains drawn, an old satellite dish perched awkwardly on the roof. I don't know why I hadn't noticed it before. It was like it didn't want to be noticed. I didn't go up to it. Not then. Something about it, no. It made my stomach turn just looking at it. The way it sat crooked, almost sunken into the ground, like it had been there too long. As night came on, I decided to stay just long enough to rest, then move on at first light. I didn't start a fire. I didn't want to attract attention. I just sat in the back of the van, doors locked, watching the horizon swallow the last traces of color. The air inside turned stifling, but I didn't open the windows. I didn't want to hear what was outside. Somewhere deep in the night, I woke up drenched in sweat. I didn't know what had pulled me from sleep. The van was still. No wind, no sound, and then there it was again. Clink, 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 Closer this time, much closer. I held my breath. My first thought was animal, coyote maybe, something scrounging for scraps, brushing against a chain or a metal post. But that wasn't right. Coyotes don't move like that. They're stealthy, deliberate. This sound had rhythm, intent, like someone making sure I heard them. I stayed still, heart knocking in my chest like a second clock. I strained to listen for any movement, any footfall, any breath outside the van. But there was nothing but that metallic clinking. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. The pattern repeated itself, as if whoever or whatever was out there was walking a circle around the van, around me. In that moment, I did what most of us do when we're terrified and alone. I told myself a story. It's nothing. It's just the wind or some old fence getting knocked around. I told myself if I didn't look, it wouldn't be real. I lay there, frozen, for maybe an hour. At some point, the clinking stopped. Not faded, just stopped. Like a switch got flipped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I watched the corners of the van windows, waiting for movement, waiting for a silhouette, but nothing came. The first light of morning was a cold relief. The sky turned pale gold, and the dark shapes outside softened into familiar forms, the bathhouse, the old sign, the brittle trees. But when I stepped out, my breath caught in my throat. Footprints all around the van. Not boot prints, not animal tracks. Bare feet, dry, cracked, wide-toed, circling, pausing at the sliding door, then continuing on. The prints ended abruptly 10 feet away in the dust, as if the person had just vanished mid-stride. My rational mind fought for air. Could be an old squatter, I thought, some drifter who saw the van and wanted to scare me off. But the size of those prints, they weren't right. Too long, too flat, like someone who hadn't worn shoes in years, maybe ever. I wanted to drive away right then. I could have thrown everything in the van and left the park behind. But something in me, a mix of fear, defiance, and maybe that same pride that brought me here, made me stay. Just long enough to check out that trailer. I figured if someone had been watching me, maybe that's where they came from. It took all my nerve to walk across that dry gravel toward the half-buried trailer. My boots crunched softly, but even the smallest sound felt offensive in the quiet. The air smelled like sunburnt aluminum and something else, like old milk spilled on fabric, sour and stale. I approached the crooked door, which hung slightly ajar. I knocked once, then twice. No answer. "Hello," I called, trying to sound confident and failing. "Just passing through, wanted to check in." Silence. I reached for the door, pushed it gently. It creaked open. What I saw inside didn't make sense. The walls were lined with heavy blankets, nailed over the windows from the inside. Every corner of the trailer was crammed with canned food, bottled water, and old newspapers. Stacks of batteries, duct-taped flashlights, a rusted CB radio buzzing static in the corner. But what struck me most was the writing. All over the inside walls, scrawled in black marker, over the windows, across the ceiling, were frantic, jagged words. "Don't hear. Don't follow. Stay inside after dark. It's not alone. It makes the sound to find you." My skin crawled. I felt like I was inside someone's last thoughts, desperate, disoriented, terrified. I backed out slowly, trying not to touch anything. As I stepped down the crooked metal stairs, I noticed something tucked under the frame of the trailer, half buried in sand. It was a Polaroid photo, bleached and worn. A man, mid-40s, scruffy beard, stood in front of a van not unlike mine. He was smiling, holding up a peace sign. Behind him, that same sign, "Welcome to Coyote Flats." I turned it over. On the back, in thick black ink, "May 3rd. If you find this, leave." I left. I didn't pack carefully. I didn't even refill my water. I got in the van and drove, wheels spitting up sand and gravel as I peeled out of that lot like the ground was on fire behind me. I didn't look in the mirrors, not until I hit pavement again. Only then did I glance back, and I swear to you, for a split second, I saw something. Not a person, not an animal, something standing just beyond the gate. Tall, still, watching. Its shape wavered in the heat shimmer, but the outline was too clean to be a trick of the light. It didn't move, just stood there as I disappeared over the rise. The rest of that day was a blur. I drove through 2 towns without stopping. By nightfall, I was parked in a real campground with other vans, with people. The sound of kids laughing, someone playing a guitar, the clang of pots being washed. It all felt like music from another planet. I sat there in the van, engine off, door locked, trying to shake off the sense that something had followed me, something I couldn't see, something that still knew my name, even if I never told it. In the weeks that followed, I tried to forget it. I told myself I'd imagined parts of it, that the silence of the desert messes with your mind, that maybe I'd just stumbled on someone's old doomsday prepper site and freaked myself out. But there's one thing I can't explain away. A few days after I got home, I went through my camera roll. I hadn't taken many photos at Coyote Flats, just a few when I first rolled in before things got strange. But in the very last photo, the one I don't remember taking, there's something in the background. Just past the bathhouse, half in shadow. A figure. Too tall, no face, just there. And in the top corner of the frame, almost obscured by sun glare, are 3 faint marks scratched into the sky. Clink, clink, clink. I deleted the photo, or at least I tried to. I hit that little trash icon, watched it disappear, then emptied the recently deleted folder too, just to be sure. But the next morning, when I opened my camera roll again, it was back. Same photo, same shadowy figure, same 3 faint scratches in the corner of the sky. I stared at it until my eyes burned, trying to find a rational explanation. Some kind of glitch, a corrupted file, a delayed backup. I even checked the metadata. It claimed the photo had been taken at 3:09 a.m., a time I knew for a fact I hadn't been outside the van, let alone taking pictures. After that, I stopped sleeping. Every night, as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, I'd lock every door in my apartment, pull the shades tight, and sit in silence with every light on. I kept the van parked 2 blocks away, like just having it near might draw something to me. I couldn't explain what it was, but I could feel it. Not in the room, but in the margins of dreams. I started waking up at 3:09 every night, not with a start, not from nightmares. Just woke up, eyes wide open, breath held, listening. For what I didn't know, I never heard anything at first. Then came the tapping. Not metal on metal this time. Wood on glass. Soft, deliberate, clink, clink, clink. The first time it happened, I thought it was just some drunk in the alley behind my building. But the second night, it came from the fire escape. Third night, from the hallway outside my apartment. Fourth, from my bedroom window. Fifth, from inside the walls. I called a friend, Nora, someone I used to camp with back in college. She was tough, believed in everything and nothing at once. Ghosts, Bigfoot, parallel timelines. But she also believed most scary things could be explained with bad plumbing or brain chemistry. I told her everything, from the abandoned RV park to the footprints to the photo that wouldn't delete. She was quiet for a long time, then finally said, "I think you need to go back." My blood ran cold. What the hell are you talking about? You brought something with you. It's unfinished business, whatever it is. If it followed you, maybe it wants to be returned. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the first time I'd felt real fear settle into my bones like an anchor. That's insane, Nora. But a week later, I did it anyway. I drove all the way back to Arizona, took the long route, stayed in crowded rest stops, overpriced KOAs, any place with people and lights. But with every mile, the air got drier, the roads quieter, the distance between gas stations longer, and the sound didn't stop, even in motion. Music on, windows down, pavement humming beneath the tires. I'd hear it. Faint at first in the rear speakers, then closer. Sometimes I'd catch it in the rhythm of the blinker, sometimes in the rattle of the stove door in the back. Clink, clink, clink. It was never random, always that same cadence, that same deliberate knock, knock, knock. By the time I reached the cutoff to Coyote Flats, my nerves were frayed raw. I hadn't slept more than an hour in 3 days. I looked like hell, face sunken, lips cracked from dehydration. My thoughts were tangled, jagged. But there was a strange calm in finally arriving, like I'd stepped into the eye of a storm. The sign was still there, leaning, bleached, a little more faded than before. The dirt road hadn't changed. Neither had the dead silence that greeted me the moment I turned off the main drag. Only this time, I wasn't alone. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt, faint but recent. And a small pile of offerings, candles, smooth stones, and what looked like a child's drawing, rested just inside the old gate. I parked in the same place as before, same tree, same spot. The van gave one shuddering sigh as I shut it off, like it remembered. I didn't go to the bathhouse or the office. I didn't need to see the place again to know it hadn't changed. I went straight to the trailer. It was still there, still crooked, still sunken into the ground like the desert was trying to swallow it whole. The door was closed this time, but a wind chime made of metal forks hung near the awning. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't blowing in the wind. There was no wind. It was ringing on its own. I stood still for a long time, watching the forks sway and clink in that familiar rhythm. My throat was dry as sandpaper, and I felt my heartbeat shift in rhythm with the sound, like my body was sinking to it. Then I stepped forward. The trailer door opened before I could touch it. It didn't swing open dramatically. It just creaked back, slow and reluctant, like something inside had been expecting me but wasn't pleased about it. I stepped in. The writing was gone. The blankets over the windows, the stacks of food, the Polaroids, all gone. Just an empty shell of dust and silence. And in the center of the floor, placed carefully like an offering, was my camera. I hadn't seen it in weeks. I'd assumed I'd lost it. It was turned on. Battery full. One image loaded on the screen. I picked it up with trembling hands and looked. It wasn't the trailer. It wasn't the van. It was me. Sleeping in my apartment, curled under the blankets, face turned toward the camera, and in the corner of the frame, a tall shape loomed. Bare feet, no face, just the sound of metal tapping in my ears, even though nothing in the room was moving. Clink, clink. I dropped the camera. It shattered. Sparks flickered briefly in the dust. That's when I knew there was no leaving this place. I hadn't brought something back with me. It had brought me back. I stumbled backward out of the trailer like I'd been struck. The late afternoon sun burned hot on my face, but I didn't feel warmth, just a coldness that settled into my chest and refused to move. Like breathing in the air inside that place had changed something in me, rearranged something that would never go back. I didn't bother locking the van. I didn't even look back at the trailer. I just walked, fast, heart hammering toward the old office, needing to be somewhere else, anywhere else, just to catch my breath, to get my bearings, to make some sense of what the hell was happening. The office was unchanged from before, dusty, hollow, silent. But this time, when I stepped in, the door swung shut behind me. No wind. Just shut. The sound of it echoed too loud, like the space had shifted to make room for it. I stood still, didn't breathe. Then, slowly, turned toward the far wall, the one where the guest forms had been. They were gone. In their place was a mirror, one I hadn't seen before. An old, cracked thing, its frame rusted, wood peeling, glass fogged with dust and age. It looked ancient, like it belonged in a house no one dared live in anymore. I moved closer, compelled by something I didn't understand. My reflection didn't move the way I did. I raised my hand. My reflection hesitated a fraction of a second behind. A heartbeat off, like it was trying to keep up and failing. I stepped forward. The mirror did not. I wasn't looking at me. The thing in the glass looked like me, but its eyes were wrong. Too dark, too wide. Its face was slack, jaw loose like it was about to speak but didn't know what words were. Behind it, behind me, was the shape again. That tall, faceless figure. Not watching. Waiting. I snapped away from the mirror and backed into a shelf, sending papers tumbling down. My breath was ragged now. Shallow. I needed out. Now. I shoved open the office door and sprinted across the gravel toward the van. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the ground was trying to pull me down, drag me back into the bones of this place. The sun was low now, fire orange and bleeding into the desert horizon. I turned the key. The engine coughed once, then died. "Come on," I whispered, fingers trembling. "Not now." Another turn. Nothing. I slammed my hand on the dash, panic blooming in my chest like smoke. I tried again, again. The engine groaned and caught. The relief almost knocked me out. I peeled out of the lot without looking back, tires spinning, gravel spitting. The sound of the engine, the wind, the rush of motion, it felt like freedom, like escape. But I didn't trust it. I didn't feel relief until I'd put 50 miles between me and Coyote Flats. I found a crowded truck stop near a major highway and parked right under a flickering sodium light. I sat there for a long time, engine off, doors locked, just watching people come and go, safe people, people who didn't know that a place like that even existed. Around midnight, I climbed into the back of the van and lay down, exhausted. The kind of tired that goes all the way to your bones. I shut my eyes, knowing I wouldn't sleep. And still, I woke up. 3:09 a.m. No alarm, no noise, just awake. I didn't move at first, just stared at the ceiling, breathing slow, steady, listening. Nothing. Then, tap. Once. Twice. Clink, clink. I sat up fast, heart kicking against my ribs like a caged thing. I didn't hear it again. Just those 3 taps, and then silence. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. Something was sitting on the front seat. At first, it looked like a lump of cloth. But as I moved closer, I saw what it was. A journal. My journal. The one I kept during the trip. The one I'd lost somewhere around the border of New Mexico. Thought I'd left behind at a gas station or maybe in the desert somewhere. It was open to a page I didn't remember writing, but the handwriting was mine and the ink was still wet. It never wanted the van, it wanted a door, and I opened it. That was 2 months ago. Since then, I've kept moving, never spending more than one night in any place, always somewhere crowded, lit, loud. I don't answer unknown numbers. I don't look in mirrors after dark, and I never listen to knocking sounds. I've spoken to other travelers, quietly, cautiously, and every so often someone tells a story that sounds just a little too close. A noise in the night, a place that wasn't on the map, a face in the corner of a picture they swear they didn't take. No one talks about it twice. Some places were never meant to be found. And some things wait in the silence for someone stupid enough to go looking. So if you're ever out in the desert, driving your Volkswagen through a stretch of nowhere that doesn't show up on GPS, and you see a sign for a place called Coyote Flats, don't stop. Don't follow the road. And if you hear a sound at 3:09 in the morning, 3 soft taps against your window, don't look. Because once you see it, it sees you too. And it never forgets the sound of your fear.